Hello everyone. Welcome once again to a brand new video. In the next 3 hours, we will be discovering interesting facts, strange things, and other things you might not know about World of Warcraft. So just relax, take your time, as our adventure is about to begin. We begin our journey through the legendary lands of World of Warcraft Classic, where we could find one of the most famous grinds during this specific stage of the game. It's about the Reins of the Winterspring Frostsaber, a beautiful mount that was undoubtedly one of the rarest and most exclusive that could be had in World of Warcraft during that classic era. This mount was sold in exchange for 900 gold coins by Wyvern Frostwind, a night elf NPC you could find completely isolated on a rock north of Winterspring. So maybe coming all the way here and just buying the mount doesn't seem like a big challenge, provided you had the necessary amount of gold. But the real trick was that in order to buy it, you first needed to be exalted with the Wintersaber Trainers faction, a strange faction that was mysteriously comprised only of this specific NPC, and its sole purpose in the entire game was to sell you this mount. This was a reputation that you were going to raise by completing the 3 repeatable quests given to you by this vendor, which consisted of eliminating giants and furbolgs and getting bear and chimera meat to feed the small Wintersaber cubs that would later become great mounts. Each of these 3 quests only granted a meager 50 reputation points. And considering that we needed a total of 42,000 points to go from neutral all the way to exalted, this means that we had to complete these specific missions approximately 840 times. Each quest took between 15 to 20 minutes to complete, taking into account, of course, both the elimination of the mobs and the long round trips to deliver the mission. So, doing some quick calculations, we can say that it required between 150 to 200 hours of pure gameplay to achieve exalted status, which would take between 4 to 8 weeks of constant playing, depending, of course, on how fast you are with the daily quests. It was a complete and absolute madness. Now then, once the reputation boost was finally completed and the 900 gold needed to buy the mount were spent, another great challenge arrived. The thing is, in order to ride it, you needed training in the tiger riding skill, which was not a problem if you were a night elf, since they naturally have this skill. However, if you were of any other race of the Alliance, a faction that was the only one able to complete this quest, you had to raise your reputation to exalted with Darnassus in order to learn to ride these tigers, which made this whole process even more complicated. I repeat, it was a real and truly crazy grind, but it rewarded the player with one of the most beautiful mounts in the entire game at that time, which it wasn't just sought after for its aesthetics, but also for its great exclusivity and all the prestige it gave to the player who owned it. Which, well, was an amazing achievement for any night elf who had it. But it was something even more rare and epic to see any human, gnome, or dwarf riding this mount. A player who went through a real hell and had to drink huge amounts of coffee to achieve it. Let's move on now to the next expansion, where if in vanilla the greatest prestige was riding a white tiger, in the Burning Crusade, with the arrival of flying mounts, it was all about who had the rarest and most impressive dragon of all. The Netherwing Drakes were unique models within the game, with a translucent appearance, electricity running through their entire body and wings, and a design that was totally innovative for the time. But well, obtaining that legendary mount was an even more complicated and tiring task than what we previously knew in the classic era, because before we could even talk to the necessary faction to start the reputation quests, the game placed a massive barrier in front of us that was almost insurmountable for many players. And it's because we absolutely needed to have the artisan riding skill, or, well, the epic level of the flying skill, whatever you want to call it. A skill that initially cost a staggering 5,000 gold coins, a really high amount of money that could take you days or even entire weeks of intense farming to get. This was completely necessary for every adventurer, because without this specific skill, the initial quest just wouldn't be available for your character. But okay, once you finally got over that massive gold barrier, the story became much more interesting. Mordecai, an ancient dragon, sent us directly to the Dragon Maw base camp to infiltrate their base of operations. There, through a powerful illusion, we were transformed into a fell orc mounted on a Netherwing Drake, and we had to work for the Dragon Maw clan faction, completing missions and assignments as one of their riders. Here's why it's necessary to have that top-level riding skill, because, well, without it we couldn't successfully infiltrate among these expert dragon riders. From there, a cycle of daily quests began that, well, lasted on average from 21 to 30 days of uninterrupted work, in which we climbed the ranks within that faction, going from being a mere pawn to finally becoming one of the high-ranking members of this faction. The center of the grinding was located in the Netherwing Mines, a place that was not friendly at all, more like a suffocating maze filled with elite enemies, enemy players, and those annoying flayers who constantly stunned and bothered us at every single step we took. This was a place where we had to collect crystals that would drop from enemies or obtain them directly from the nodes in the mine, with the slow respawn time and fierce competition among all the players. Additionally, we could gather minerals, skins, and powders using our professional skills. Since, well, if we were miners, herbalists, or skinners, we also got additional daily quests to complete. Also, we had to collect glands that dropped from these annoying mobs, and obviously along the way, we could also collect every Netherwing egg that we found around there, as these rewarded us with a generous 250 reputation points each, which allowed us to keep gaining reputation beyond the daily quest limit, thus being one of the methods most exploited by those players who wanted to keep raising their reputation and do it in the shortest amount of days possible, in exchange, of course, for extreme grinding. Looking for eggs all over the map for long hours of play. Once we reached the level of honored reputation, we stopped being just a pawn and were promoted to the rank of Overseer, where we received the Boots of Discipline, an iconic item in this quest chain that we had to use to kick the peons who fell asleep working in the mine. And while they even gave us intelligence missions to intercept enemy attack plans, so trust was starting to rise. Deception seemed to be working perfectly. Once we reached the revered level, we became a captain, and the grind of gathering materials and kicking peons took a back seat to make way for the legendary Skybreaker races, where you had to face off in aerial speed duels against the most skilled riders of the entire Dragon Maw clan, where the final challenge was against Captain Skyshatter, which is remembered as one of the most frustrating missions of the Burning Crusade, because, well, you had to chase him while he threw lightning at you, and if one of these hit you, you were automatically dismounted and fell from the sky while this orc mocked our failure. Without a doubt, one of the most hated moments by players who were leveling up this reputation. Finally, after long weeks of effort, you reach the maximum rank of commander by being exalted with this faction. A ceremony was organized in your honor where you would be presented before Warlord Zuluhid and even before Illidan Stormrage himself, where the latter would discover your deception and claim to see through your illusion, thus ordering your immediate execution in front of everyone else. However, we were rescued at the very last minute and safely descended at the gates of the city of Xal'atath, where finally, and as a final reward for completing this arduous task, we were allowed to choose from one of the 6 available Netherwing Drake models: the Azure, Onyx, Cobalt, Purple, or Viridian, or the Violet Drake, completely free of charge. Well, if this wasn't enough for your great thirst for collecting, you could always buy any of the other colors for only 200 gold coins each. So from that day on, every time you rode this dragon in the sky of Outland, the world knew that you were not just a mere traveler, but rather someone who had returned from the very hell of Dragonmaw with one of the most coveted trophies in the entire history of the game. We are now moving on to the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, the absolute peak of World of Warcraft, according to many players, and where one of the most extreme reputation grinds in the entire history of the game appeared. It's about the Insane in the Membrane achievement, which awarded the famous title, The Insane, to all those who had completely lost their mind in Azeroth at the time of obtaining it. Well, this wasn't just an ordinary reputation farming task, but rather involved raising a set of reputations that contradicted each other, even forcing you to become friends with those who were once the player's greatest enemies. The first major hurdle to achieving this feat was a complete contradiction, as you had to be honored with the Bloodsail Buccaneers while also being exalted with the Steamweedle Cartel, which included Booty Bay, Everlook, Gadget Zon, and Ratchet. To increase your reputation with the pirates, you had to first declare war on the goblins and eliminate their guards in any of their cities. Each guard would give you reputation with the pirates, but you would lose double the reputation with these 4 goblin cities. So once you finally managed to be honored with the pirates, all the goblin cities would hate you to death and attack you just by seeing you pass by. So you couldn't use their auction houses, banks, flight masters, or vendors. Now, to complete the achievement, you should also have reached the exalted rank with them. So once you have met the requirements for the Bloodsail Buccaneers, it was time to reconcile with the goblins. For that, you had to spend weeks killing thousands of pirates in Tanaris or the Barrens to regain your reputation with the goblins until you reached exalted, but without losing what you gained with the pirates. Yes, you had to keep a careful balance between both factions, being exalted with the goblins and staying within the honored range with the pirates, always having to maintain this difficult balance. As of today, this achievement has reduced difficulty and records that you were once honored with them, regardless of your reputation level at the time of obtaining the achievement. But originally, you needed to have both reputations at the required level at the same time to be awarded the title. Now, this does not end there, as the next step was to reach Exalted with Ravenholt, where the easy part was to go from neutral, an honorable one because, well, it only required killing NPCs from the Syndicate in the Arathi Highlands. But from there, everything got complicated when you wanted to go from honorable to exalted, because the only way to achieve this was by delivering heavy junk boxes, some unique items that they could not be farmed by killing enemies, nor were they found in the open world. Rather, they were obtained by using the technique of stealing or pickpocketing by a rogue on enemies above level 50. The player needed to deliver 1,400 boxes to reach the necessary reputation. And if you weren't cunning, then you had to hire one, or just buy the boxes from another player at exorbitant prices, since, well, these couldn't be posted in the auction house and had to instead be traded directly with other players, which made the mask for absurd amounts of money to finally sell them. After finishing this, you also had to reach Exalted with the Dark Moon Fair, which at that time in the game was much more complicated than it is today and required sacrificing large amounts of gold. The fastest and most expensive way to level up was by turning in completed epic decks with inscription. Each deck gave you 350 reputation points, which, well, in older expansions could cost several thousand gold in materials to reach the required level. In addition, you could only hand them in when the fair event was active, that is, only 1 week per month. If you didn't have everything ready in advance to deliver the decks, then you had to wait until the following month. Finally, You also had to be exalted with the Shendralar and the Massacre, for which you only had to complete deliveries in a repeatable mission. But it consisted of collecting extremely rare books from a completely random drop and delivering them along with diamonds, pristine, and other materials that were excessively expensive, which made it an absurdly difficult task even for the most advanced WoW players. It was so much so that Blizzard decided to completely remove this faction from the achievement starting from the Cataclysm expansion. But, well, for the veterans of World of Warcraft, all those who achieved this achievement back in the day and walked around with the title The Insane above their characters were considered true legends who carried one of the most expensive and difficult achievements to obtain in the entire history of the game. So, going back to the vanilla version of World of Warcraft, the political story of the Alliance revolved entirely around the disappearance of the King of Stormwind, which of course was not a minor detail in the lore at all, but was literally one of the central mysteries of this faction during the very first stage of the game. The throne of Stormwind was occupied by a young boy we all know named Anduin, under the leadership of Bolvar for Dragon. And well, many NPCs scattered throughout the game talked about the exact same thing. The king had simply vanished during an important diplomatic mission, and absolutely no one knew where he was. Up to that point, everything seemed completely normal, and it genuinely seemed like Blizzard was just carefully setting up a long-term storyline for the King of Stormwind. However, the king was actually inside the world of Azeroth the whole time, and the more curious players could even find him if they looked hard enough. It wasn't part of a secret lore, a hidden event within the game, or an epic quest chain. But if you simply took the time to explore areas that seemed to have no purpose whatsoever within the game, you would eventually be able to find him. And well, by exploring areas a bit isolated from the typical mission hubs, we could reach Alkaz Island, a large lost island to the northeast of the Marsh Mud Wallow, where there was no quest chain or any real reason to go there at all. But well, if you somehow got there for some reason, you would find a place absolutely full of elite-level nagas and other very dangerous creatures. A place where, as I say, you had no business being unless you were specifically looking for something strange. And there, hidden underground, inside one of the dungeon cells, was Varian Wrynn himself, the King of Stormwind. But the strangest thing of all was not finding him, but actually getting to him, after having faced a large number of powerful mobs and finally realizing that you could do absolutely nothing with him. You had right in front of you the lost king that everyone was looking for, but there was no way to free him. There were no lines of dialogue and no possible interaction to have with him whatsoever. He was just a static NPC placed there, as if he were just another object in the scenery. It was as if you had accidentally accessed something that Blizzard didn't think the average player could ever access during that period of the game. Because yes, later it was revealed that all of this was part of a much deeper story linked to Ahn'Qiraj, the Defias Brotherhood, and a conspiracy they had carefully carried out to kidnap the king and destabilize the city of Stormwind. It was even revealed that Varian had been split into two versions of himself, one weaker and more easily manipulated, and the other turned into the strong gladiator known as Lo'Gosh, whom we got to know in many of the comics. But of course, for the average vanilla player who had encountered this NPC at the time, none of this made any sense at all. It was simply an NPC that existed in a hidden place without any purpose or explanation. So the players believed that this NPC would eventually play an important role in a quest chain in the future. But reality was very different from that, as during patch 1.9, that is, just a year after it was first discovered in this location, the non-player character was simply removed from the game forever, and we never really knew what Blizzard's real plan was for it. On the coast of Tamers, far from the goblin cities and mission objectives, there was an NPC from the vanilla era that was, and to this day still remains, a complete mystery to the players. It's about Zalashji, a level 45 naga who lived in a small cave known as Zalashji's Den. And unlike most other nagas in the world of Azeroth, which, well, as you know, are Completely aggressive by nature and attack anyone who dares to approach their territory, this one was instead a friendly NPC for both Alliance and Horde members alike. This NPC didn't fight with anyone, and all it did was wander peacefully between its cave and the beach shore, where it spent long periods of time just quietly looking out at the sea. An NPC without any real purpose, as it didn't give quests, didn't sell items, didn't belong to a faction, and didn't have any dialogue whatsoever explaining why it was alone in an area so far from the large Naga settlements we knew in the game. And this is exactly when players started coming up with all kinds of theories, which were quite varied. Some believed it was a rebellious Naga who had deserted to lead a calmer and more peaceful life. Others thought it was a tribute to some deceased developer, like, well, so many others we can find across the world of Azeroth. And even some said it was simply a trapped Naga who had somehow forgotten how to swim. Personally, I tend to think that it's an NPC from a mission that was simply cut and removed before its release. However, no matter how many theories we come up with, the reality is that its true purpose was never known, and it remains to this day one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in the world of Azeroth. With the arrival of the Cataclysm expansion, this non-player character was completely removed as part of the game's massive map redesign. So, well, it is no longer possible to find this Naga anywhere, let alone know what its true purpose ever was. Now, located in one of the most remote and hard-to-reach corners of all of Kalimdor, near the lands of Xal'atath, we can find a hidden Tauren village that has been in the game since the time of Vanilla. There we will see the entrance to a dark cave where, as we go deeper inside, we will encounter Andrestrasz, a dragon who remains asleep in a deep and seemingly endless slumber, and who was discovered at the beginning thanks to players who decided to explore areas that were not linked to any quests. And that seemed to be there simply because they were part of the game's setting for those flying from one point to another, an area that was very difficult to access during the Vanilla era, which made it even more surprising for those who found it. However, the more curious players who decided to enter this area got a huge surprise when they finally encountered this dragon. And although the zone, as I say, has existed since the Vanilla era, and despite the fact that the Tauren village was eliminated with the arrival of the Cataclysm, the cave still remains there to this day. Andrestrasz was added to the game in patch 5.3 during the Mists of Pandaria expansion. And what surprised many players immediately after finding him was, of course, his incredibly low level, since despite being a large adult dragon, he was only level 5. An absurdly low number for a creature of this magnitude. This detail, coupled with the fact that the dragon could neither be awakened nor attacked in any way, strongly suggested that it was not there to be eliminated. However, without offering any quests, or having any lines of dialogue at all, the mystery only grew bigger and bigger. So, well, since Blizzard never responded, the community eventually agreed that this dragon was most likely a tribute to a developer's relative who had passed away, and they decided to create a memorial within the game. Probably a child, which would explain why the dragon is level 5, referring of course to the possible age of the deceased child. Something that was even hinted at in a certain way by a former Blizzard developer before he left the company. Later on, during the game's 20th anniversary, players discovered a small Easter egg hidden inside this cave. Behind the dragon, there is a pile of bones that is impossible to interact with under normal circumstances. However, if we summon a specific pet in this place, the Perky Pug, this little guy will excavate the area and give us the object called Mysterious Bones, which if we take it to Stormheim in the Broken Isles and bury it in front of a tomb, we will get the quest called Surprisingly Pristine Celebration Crate, which is part of a search for 6 of these crates to complete an achievement from the expansion, The War Within, which of course doesn't explain the origin or the meaning of this strange NPC in the game at all, but it does at least give some sense and usefulness to the area. In the heart of the Ashura zone, we can find one of the most eccentric and charismatic NPCs in the entire game, who, despite not being a secret NPC, managed to leave a lasting mark on all the players who got to know her. I'm talking about Subject 9. This one began its life as a simple purple raptor hatchling that was taken from the wastelands to the KTC headquarters in Kazan. There, it became the subject of various cognitive enhancement experiments led by a goblin engineer known for his rather unorthodox methods. And the fact is that through the application of diverse technologies and chemical substances, this raptor eventually came to develop an intelligence far superior to all others of its species, thus being able to master the human language and even understand certain complex concepts of science and engineering. When the players find her in Ashura's secret laboratory, Subject 9 is no longer a mere beast in any sense of the word, but she communicates very fluently and with a logic that is clearly superior to that of many humans. Her level of self-awareness is so remarkably high that she has even intellectually surpassed the brilliant goblins who created her. The quest chain associated with this NPC is one of the most curious in the entire Ashura area. After realizing that Azeroth is a completely chaotic and inefficient planet, she decides that the only logical option to ensure the future of her species is to leave the world entirely. For this, she has been carefully raising a new generation of cognitively superior raptors with the help of Subject 4. And this is exactly where the players must step in and help her in her mission to obtain the blueprints of a rocket and free the experimental raptor hatchlings from the Ashura area. At the end of this series of missions, after helping her create the rocket she plans to escape with, we can see Subject 9 loading her intelligent offspring into the rocket and taking off towards the stars with the goal of colonizing a brand new world for herself and all of her offspring. Undoubtedly, one of the strangest and most curious quests we can find anywhere within the game world. Nagrand is known as one of the most peaceful and aesthetically pleasing areas of all of Outland. Its beautiful sky and floating green meadows convey a sense of peace and calm that very few places in the entire game can really match. However, there is a hidden place in this area where we can find the home of Challe's children, which is the center of one of the darkest and most twisted theories within the game. A theory which ended up being confirmed decades later by the developers themselves. At first glance, this place seems like a simple daycare with absolutely nothing to hide, where Challe, a level 70 troll, takes care of babies of different races: humans, orcs, trolls, taurens, and even elves. In this place, we can find sandboxes, toys, and, well, different pastimes for all these children. Everything seems very cute and completely innocent at first. However, the players who started to look very closely at the details, just like we did on this channel several years ago, discovered a rather sinister reality hiding beneath the surface. Behind the main hut, there are 3 cages. In one of them, we can find the bones of a small humanoid. Yes, the very same size as the children playing just a few meters away. There is also a doghouse without a dog, but surrounded by flies with rotten meat inside, and several other very dark and disturbing things. For years and years, players speculated that this troll was a witch who raised children to consume them or use them in various dark rituals. A rather logical suspicion, of course, considering the large witch's cauldron we could also find near the entrance of the place. Later on, during the Warlords of Draenor expansion, which, as you know, takes place in an alternate version of Outland's past, players received a quest in that timeline from Garrock, where he reveals that Challe is an orc who seems to never age at all, and that he suspects she murdered his wife Dahaka out of pure jealousy. Upon traveling there and confronting Challe in her lair, it is discovered that she is a powerful practitioner of the dark arts, using dark witch spells to drain the life essence of her victims in order to maintain her eternal youth. During the fight, Challe takes on multiple forms, including, of course, her iconic appearance as the Outland Troll, confirming once and for all that both characters are indeed the same being. This makes it very clear that in that orphanage in Outland, the children are not under her protection at all, but rather are her reserve of food and energy to stay eternally young. This indicates that Challe has been collecting and harvesting orphans for at least a full century in the game's timeline, making her one of the most twisted and deeply disturbing characters in all of World of Warcraft. In the experimental version of World of Warcraft, known as Season of Discovery, we got to know a character who serves as a bridge between the classic world of the game and the more modern storylines of the newer expansions. This entity represents one of the craziest and most unexpected incorporations in the game's lore, and strongly suggests that the forces of the Void have been operating much more directly in the past of the game's history than we ever initially believed. This non-player character, known simply as Shadowy figure, physically appears as a night elf shrouded in a dense mist of shadows, completely unable to reveal her physical or facial features, and is just a silhouette of pure darkness reminiscent of the Void Elves from the more modern expansions. Her first interaction takes place in the Alterac Mountains, near Ravenholt Manor, where after players destroy a corrupt object known as the Box, instead of attacking us, the figure mocks us for being bored by destroying something so powerful and then proceeds to offer us forbidden knowledge. This is how this character acts as a kind of profession instructor, but specifically for Void-infused epic-level gear recipes, where she teaches us to create these dark and powerful pieces of equipment for our characters. But we have also seen this figure silently watching our battles against certain raid bosses, only to disappear once the encounter is completely over, making it very clear that it is always watching us and knows each and every one of our moves. The lore research community within the game has come to the conclusion that this figure is a kind of manifestation of Xal'atath. And although in the original timeline, Xal'atath should be locked away in her blade during the vanilla era, her well-known ability to project her consciousness and possess different bodies or corpses, like that of the elf Inannis that occurred in battle for Azeroth, explains her physical appearance here in Season of Discovery. There are several theories circulating in the game community suggesting that Xal'atath is using these alternate timelines to collect essences of the old gods at their most powerful moments. It is also speculated that her presence within Ahn'Qiraj during our fight against C'Thun allows her to absorb his essence to set the stage for the events of the World Soul Saga in the modern expansions. So this figure is not just a strange NPC, but rather a dark and calculating entity that uses, or rather cleverly exploits, the greed of players to obtain powerful Void-marked gear to ensure its own rise in the future of Azeroth. Up to this point, all of these are just theories, and still, of course, we don't fully know the truth behind her actions, but without a doubt, she is one of the strangest and most mysterious NPCs that we can encounter anywhere in the game today. For the vast majority of players, fishing is one of the most relaxing activities in World of Warcraft. But that doesn't mean it's the same for those who want to push it to the absolute limit and attempt achievements like Accomplished Angler. Introduced in Wrath of the Lich King, this meta achievement required completing another 14 fishing achievements to unlock it, essentially forcing you to go through nearly all the fishing content from the game's earliest expansions. And the worst part is that fishing in World of Warcraft relies almost entirely on RNG, which means you could be doing everything perfectly and still make absolutely no progress toward these achievements. These achievements didn't just require leveling up your fishing skill, but also fishing in very specific locations, catching thousands of fish, landing ultra-rare fish with extremely low chances of appearing, fishing in the capital city of each faction, even your enemy faction, completing daily quests, and, well, many other things on top of that. Among the hardest achievements on this list were Mr. Pinchy's Magical Crawdad Box and the Master of Coins. The first one required fishing up Mr. Pinchy, an ultra-rare item that appeared in specific high-level areas, most commonly in Terakar Forest, and this item had a 0.2% chance of appearing, which, when used, could grant you one of 3 random wishes, including the possibility of giving you the box required for the achievement. The problem was that not only did you need to get Mr. Pinchy in the first place, but you also had to be lucky enough for him to actually give you the item you were looking for through one of his wish rewards, with a full 2-day cooldown between each attempt, the achievement. The Coin Master, on the other hand, was also extremely complicated, as it required collecting a total of 52 specific coins that had to be fished in the city of Dalaran, each with an absurdly low drop rate, meaning it could take long hours and even entire days of gameplay just to collect them all. Finally, another highly challenging achievement was winning the Vega de Tuertespina fishing tournament, competing in real time against dozens or even hundreds of other players, all fighting for the same fishing pools during the event. All of this while dealing with a strict time limit and brutal RNG just to become the best fisherman of the event, meaning you often had to try multiple times. An event that only happened once a week on Sundays, so if you failed the first time, which was, well, very likely, you had to wait until the following week to try again. Undoubtedly one of the most demanding achievements in the entire game, as it combined several of the hardest requirements and demanded a massive time investment to complete, rewarding you with the title The Salty for your character. A title that, even today, is held by less than 18% of the total player base. Now, there's no doubt that fishing achievements test your patience, but the famous Con achievement tests something even more difficult: your ability to dominate other real players in PvP. To achieve this title, introduced during the Mists of Pandaria expansion, you had to complete all the master achievements across 5 different battlegrounds. And that alone already meant an absurd grind, since you needed 100 victories in each, which adds up to a minimum of 500 battleground wins. And that was just the beginning, because what truly made this title almost impossible wasn't just the sheer number of victories required, but the specific achievements you had to complete within each of these battlegrounds. Achievements that didn't just depend on playing well, but on your entire team performing almost perfectly. For example, in Twin Peaks, there was an achievement called Cloud 9, which required capturing and returning 9 flags in a single match. A match that usually ended long before that could even happen. Then, in the Battle for Gilneas, there was an achievement called Perfection, where you had to win 1500 to 0, meaning complete domination from the very first second without making a single mistake. In the Temple of Kotmogu, one of the 8 required achievements for that battleground involved accumulating 8,000 points with orbs, something that, as you probably know, can be extremely difficult to pull off. In the Silver Shard Mines, one of the hardest among the 9 required achievements was the so-called 5-in-1, which required capturing 5 carts in a single match without dying even once. And on Isle of Conquest, one of the most ridiculous requirements was destroying 10 vehicles and eliminating 100 players using turrets. And remember, I've only mentioned a small portion of the 53 total achievements required to complete this meta achievement and earn the coveted title of Con, which, even today, is held by less than 1% of all players. If some achievements demand extreme skill and others rely entirely on luck, the next one on our list requires something even more valuable: your time. Yes, we're talking about Loremaster, an achievement that demands hundreds of hours of gameplay, completing quests, and exploring the entire game world. This achievement is all about completing the full story of Azeroth, from the forests of Elwynn to Northrend, passing through Outland, Pandaria, and beyond. It's a complete journey across the entire game, and despite being a demanding and time-consuming achievement, it's also one of the best ways to truly experience everything this universe has to offer. And even though today this achievement is still time-consuming, the reality is that it was heavily simplified compared to what it used to be several expansions ago, And now, it focuses on completing specific achievements tied to each continent or game world. Back in Wrath of the Lich King, when this achievement was first introduced, it required completing 700 quests in Kalimdor, another 700 in the Eastern Kingdoms, and also completing specific achievements for every zone in Outland and Northrend, which took an enormous amount of time for the average player. And that's why, after Cataclysm, Blizzard decided to simplify it. Now, what we need to do is complete specific storylines or narrative chapters in each zone, which significantly reduces the total number of quests required. But don't be mistaken, it's still a very long grind, and players can spend several months of consistent gameplay completing everything. For a player starting from scratch, it's estimated that completing Loremaster takes anywhere between 80 and 130 hours of in-game time, and that's using guides, add-ons, and knowing exactly what you're doing. So in the end, we're talking about an achievement that was extremely difficult in its original version, and even today, after being simplified, it still consumes a massive amount of time. But if you enjoy lore and exploring every corner of this incredible World of Warcraft universe, this is probably one of the most rewarding achievements you can get. During the Warlords of Draenor expansion, Blizzard introduced a unique open-world PvP system through the player's garrison, specifically through the building known as the Gladiator's Sanctum. This building granted access to a series of PvP missions across the zones of Draenor, and within this system existed one of the longest and most tedious grinds of the entire expansion. This came in the form of Nemesis missions, which required the player to select a specific race from the opposing faction and eliminate 500 players of that race in the open world of Draenor. This alone was already a massive grind. But the real problem was that it wasn't just one race. You had to eliminate them all. In other words, to complete the achievement, you had to repeat this process multiple times, stacking up thousands of kills in total. And this is where the true difficulty came in. Not only because of the sheer number of hours required in PvP combat, but also because you depended on constantly finding players of specific races and successfully eliminating them. And while some races like humans or blood elves are relatively common, since they're among the most popular in the game, others like Pandaren or goblins were much harder to find, making progress extremely slow, or even leading to entire days without finding a single player of the race you needed. But the Nemesis missions weren't the only requirement, as players also had to collect thousands of broken bones through PvP in Draenor, adding yet another layer of grind to the process. Oh, and on top of that, you also had to complete the High Mall Coliseum event. This was a free-for-all battle where up to 20 players fought each other until only one remained standing. To complete it, you had to actually win the match. Back then, you could try multiple times until you succeeded, but nowadays it's far more difficult, since you first need to gather enough players for the event to even start, and only then try to come out on top. The pet battle system in World of Warcraft is often underestimated by most players, who see it as just another mini-game for Pokémon fans. However, within this system lies one of the longest and most extreme grinds in the game's history: Legendary Pet Brawler. This achievement requires winning a total of 5,000 pet battles against other players using the random matchmaking system. At first glance, it might seem like something simple that just takes time, but in reality, it takes a lot of time, since each battle usually lasts between 5 and 8 minutes. And on top of that, you also have to factor in queue times. Since it's not as popular as it once was, there are days where you might wait several minutes just to find a match, meaning each battle can easily take between 5 to more than 10 minutes in total. And if we consider that the achievement requires not 5,000 matches played, but 5,000 victories, we're talking about thousands of matches and potentially thousands of hours spent exclusively on pet battles in World of Warcraft, making it one of the most extreme grinds on this list. And speaking of PvP, we can't leave out one of the most difficult long-term achievements in this category. Honor Level 500, introduced in Battle for Azeroth alongside the new Honor Progression system. This system works as a continuous progression track that increases as the player participates in battlegrounds, arenas, or any kind of PvP content. And unlike many other achievements in the game, this is not something you can complete in a few weeks or even a couple of months. Reaching Honor Level 500 requires accumulating approximately 4,400,000 honor points in total, considering that each level requires 8,800 points. This means players need to participate in thousands of matches over time to make meaningful progress, which in practice translates into hundreds, or more realistically, thousands of hours dedicated purely to PvP. An achievement clearly designed for long-term progression, not something meant to be completed within a single expansion. Even today, it's held by less than 1% of the player base, and you can easily recognize those who have it by the special mount awarded upon completion. And finally, we come to what is probably one of the most frustrating grinds on this entire list. I'm Going to Need a Bigger Bag is an achievement introduced in Mists of Pandaria, focused entirely on the Timeless Isle, a zone designed as open content where players could explore, farm, and collect rare items without a clear structure. The objective of this achievement is simple to understand, but incredibly difficult to complete, as it requires obtaining all the rare items on the list, more than 50 in total, which drop from elite creatures, chests, or specific events. The problem is that most of these items have extremely low drop rates, often below 1%, meaning you can kill the same creature over and over for hours and still get absolutely nothing. In some cases, even killing the enemy isn't enough, since certain rares require specific conditions to spawn, such as farming common enemies for extended periods just to trigger their appearance. And once they finally show up, there's a high chance another player will kill them before you even get the chance. It's estimated that completing this achievement can take anywhere between 100 and 500 hours of gameplay, depending almost entirely on your luck. And that's exactly what makes it one of the worst grinds in the game. Not because it's mechanically difficult, but because it relies completely on RNG. If there is one item that perfectly represents the transition between classic World of Warcraft and its first expansion, the Burning Crusade, it is, without a doubt, the Tabard of the Protector. An exclusive item that could only be obtained during the TBC pre-launch event, which took place at the end of the year 2006 and lasted for approximately 2 weeks. The quest to get it was called Into the Breach, and we got it from an NPC in the Blasted Lands, right in front of the Dark Portal. The objective was very simple. Players had to defeat 6 Felguards from the many that came out of the Dark Portal into the world of Azeroth. So well, at first glance, this may seem like an extremely simple task, but let's put ourselves in the context of that time, where with the release of the new expansion, the area of the Dark Portal was in absolute chaos, where lag and conflicts between factions made this 5-minute mission take a couple of hours. But well, beyond that, it was still a very simple mission overall. Apparently, this tabard was similar to the famous Argent Dawn tabard, but with the peculiarity of having a curious usage effect that demonstrated how heroic your character was, and allowed you to show it off in front of other players. Now then, the rarity of this item increased even more depending on your character's race, Because if you had this tabard equipped on a Blood Elf or a Draenei, which were the new races that arrived along with this expansion, it meant that you had to level up that character from level 1 to 55 in less than 2 weeks to be able to participate in this event and get the reward before it disappeared forever. In summary, it was a relatively easy item to obtain, but you had to be playing at that exact time 20 years ago to get it, with very few true veteran players still having it today. If you found the Tabard of the Protector too easy to get, then it's time to raise the stakes a little bit. Dirge's Kickin' Chimarock Chops is the only epic quality cooking recipe ever introduced in the entire history of the game. And well, this was part of one of the most costly and challenging quest chains in the classic era of World of Warcraft, the Scepter of the Shifting Sands chain, which was required in order to open the gates of the Ahn'Qiraj raid. Obtaining this recipe required the player to go through one of the most expensive and time-consuming quests in the entire game, where the NPC Dirge Quickcleave, located in Gadgetzan, asked for a series of materials that, at that time, cost a considerable amount of gold. The main ingredient was Chimarock Tenderloin, which could only be obtained from elite Chimarocks found on the Isle of Dread in the Faerlus area, a very dangerous location filled with high-level enemies, where only players in coordinated groups could realistically farm them. But in addition to that, other materials were also required, coming from professions such as alchemy and mining, in order to fully complete this quest chain. The food that this recipe allowed players to cook was extremely important for high-level guilds trying to progress, since it granted a bonus of 25 stamina points, which at the time was a very strong buff, and made it one of the best consumables for tanks facing bosses like C'Thun or the Four Horsemen. The recipe was eventually removed from the game in patch 4.0.3 with the arrival of Cataclysm, which eliminated not only the quest itself, but also the possibility of ever learning this recipe again. So today, players who still know this recipe, or even better, still have the physical item stored somewhere in their bank or inventory, are in possession of one of the rarest items that is now completely unobtainable in the entire game. It is also an item that can occasionally be seen on the auction house listed for extremely high amounts of gold. Not because of its current usefulness, which is practically non-existent, but because of how incredibly rare it has become over time. Now we raise the difficulty a bit further, and this time we're not talking about items that were only obtainable for a limited period of time, but rather items that are technically still available in the game today, although their drop rates are so low that obtaining them becomes extremely unlikely. We all know that Blizzard has always enjoyed including references to different elements of popular culture within the game, and because of that, while playing World of Warcraft, we can find items like the One Ring, which is a very clear reference to the Lord of the Rings, with a description that says it is not as powerful as the Two Ring. It also provides small bonuses to several different stats and can be equipped from level 10. So in practical terms, it is not a particularly strong or relevant item. Of course, that doesn't change the fact that obtaining it is extremely difficult, since the only way to get it is through fishing in low-level areas such as the Canals of Stormwind or the Ponds of Orgrimmar. An item that drops with an estimated probability of 0.007%. So most fishermen will never see it in their lifetime, even if they spend hundreds of hours fishing. Later on, during the Burning Crusade, Blizzard decided to continue this joke by adding Ring 2, which is a level 70 epic quality ring, much better than its previous version that grants multiple stats at once, and, as clearly stated in its description, is infinitely superior to Ring 1. This ring was also obtained through fishing, but this time through the daily fishing quest in Shattrath, which made it still extremely difficult to obtain. And because of that, It used to be sold for large amounts of gold in the auction house. Finally, during Wrath of the Lich King, Blizzard released what would be the final version of this item. Or well, at least the latest version that we know of so far. This is ring number 5, which has a description stating that it seems to have eaten rings number 3 and 4, which would explain why those versions do not exist anywhere in the game. This ring was also obtained through fishing, since it had a chance to appear inside small titanium lockboxes, which themselves had a very low chance of being found inside the fishing reward bags obtained from Dalaran's daily quests. The ring itself had a 5% chance of appearing inside those lockboxes, but those lockboxes only had a 0.2% chance of appearing in the fishing reward bags, which translates to a 0.01% chance of getting this ring. This means an average of 10,000 daily fishing missions completed and, well, if we do the math, this translates to an estimated 27 years of gameplay to finally be able to get this useless item. Now, if we talk about ultra-rare weapons that few players have nowadays, we have to mention the Xorothian Firestick, a rifle with a truly unique aesthetic within the game. And it is one of the few items that require the collaboration of a specific class different from the users to obtain, which makes it even more interesting. This rifle dropped from Lord Hal'Narath, an optional boss that could only be summoned in Dire Maul during a Warlock-exclusive quest where this class obtained its epic mount, making it directly tied to one of the most memorable quest lines in the game. A very interesting quest that I'm sure many of you will remember we completed a couple of years ago on this channel during the Classic era, which adds even more nostalgia to this item. The problem is that only the Warlocks who completed the original mission to obtain their epic mount in the Classic version still have the necessary items to perform the summoning ritual for this boss today, which limits access to it significantly. And given that this series of quests was completely removed in Cataclysm, only veteran Warlocks who kept those items in their banks for over 15 years can summon the boss in the modern version of the game, making it extremely rare to even see this encounter nowadays. This has created an alternative market within the game where hunters pay large sums of gold for an ancient Warlock to accompany them to Dire Maul and give them the chance to face the boss, and if they're lucky, obtain this rifle for their transmog collection, turning it into a very unique service. The rifle also has a drop chance of 33%, so the hunter who wants to obtain it will probably need to hire the Warlock for multiple attempts until finally seeing it drop, which can become quite expensive over time. Destroyer of Worlds is a sword that, despite not being legendary, was able to cause psychological trauma in all those who ever attempted to acquire it, mainly because of how frustrating its acquisition process was. There are 2 versions of this weapon. The first and original one is the one that dropped from Hakkar and Zul'Gurub during Vanilla and was removed from the game, becoming unavailable forever after that point. And well, later the version linked to the profession of archaeology, which was introduced in Cataclysm, is the one we also know today, and the one that most players have attempted to obtain. This latter is an item linked to the account that not only gave us the possibility of obtaining the appearance of this ancient sword that had been removed and using it as a transfiguration, but also the sword was very powerful for its time, with good stats, and directly competed with high-level raid gear in those days, making it both useful and desirable. In other words, it was a pretty decent sword that not only had a unique design that looked good, but you could also use it and get real benefits from it during the endgame, which made it even more appealing for players. However, obtaining it was truly a headache, as archaeology was a purely random and utterly ruthless profession, where progress depended entirely on luck rather than effort. To obtain this weapon, you first needed to reconstruct a rare artifact from the Troll branch, which was already difficult by itself. However, there was no linear progression nor guarantees of success as there are in other professions, so you could spend weeks traveling all over Azeroth, digging up hundreds of common fragments without the sword project even appearing in your profession book, which made the process extremely frustrating. So here you were dealing with a double RNG, making the whole process even worse than it already was. First, pray that the dig sites appeared in the Eastern Kingdoms, which, well, was where the vast majority of troll fragments appeared, of course due to the lore of empires like the Gurubashi or the Yamani in these lands. But nevertheless, the map only allowed having 4 active excavations at the same time across the continent, which forced the players to be in a constant loop where they had to fly across the world to clear excavations of dwarfs or fossils that were absolutely useless to you, just to try to force the game to hopefully make a troll excavation site appear, which often took a long time. Well, there you had to cross your fingers so that when you finished one artifact, the next one on the list would be this sword, something that could take an absurd amount of time. Now we delve into a category of objects even harder to obtain than all the ones we've seen before in this video, entering a completely different level of rarity. And the first of them is the contest winner's tabard, the rarest faction item in the entire history of World of Warcraft, something that almost no one has ever seen. This was the unique reward of the Test of Honor contest, held back in the year 2005 to promote the new honor system that appeared for the first time in World of Warcraft. The tabard was not obtained by chance or by completing a mission, but Blizzard gave it exclusively to the Alliance player and the Horde player who had accumulated the highest absolute number of honor points on their server during the month the event lasted, making it a purely competitive reward. This means that at the time of delivery there were only 2 tabards per kingdom and 1 per faction, making it incredibly limited from the very beginning. After nearly 2 decades of gameplay, most of the original winners have stopped playing or have lost their accounts, which reduced the number of existing tabards even more. Its design may not be the most attractive in the game, but its rarity is absolute and represents a competitive achievement that we will never see again in the game, making it truly unique. But if we talk about tabards, another extremely rare one is the Frost Tabard, which belongs to a series of 8 epic quality tabards linked to the discontinued World of Warcraft collectible card game, making it part of a very exclusive category. Originally, it was not found in common envelopes as a direct loot card, as mounts, pets, or other similar items were, but it was obtained by exchanging 2,000 UDE points, which were collected from the point cards that came inside the game booster packs, making it much harder to get. Since the trading card game was completely canceled several years ago, there are almost no unused codes left that can be redeemed today, which makes the remaining ones extremely valuable. So the few that are currently in the retail game are probably the only ones that still exist, making them incredibly rare. The tabard appears very rarely in the black market auction house at extremely high prices, and the competition for it is so intense that it does not last long once it is listed, as it is immediately purchased by bots that spend millions of gold to acquire it. It is truly an item that has gone from being a simple reward for card game players to becoming a luxury asset reserved for the economic elite of World of Warcraft, especially collectors. Finally, the crown jewel of this video is Mini Tyrael, which is known as the most prestigious and valuable pet in all of World of Warcraft, and one of the most desired collectibles in the entire game. Its origin dates back to an international Blizzard event held in Paris in the year 2008 to present Diablo 3, where every attendee received a gift card with a code that granted the item known as Tyrael's Hilt, which allowed players to summon this pet. A total of 8,000 cards were printed for this event, which means there are theoretically the same number of these pets in the game. However, the real number of active codes in the game, meaning those that were actually redeemed by players, is much lower, so there are not literally 8,000 in existence, but rather significantly fewer. What makes Mini Tyrael so special, aside from its rarity, is that it is an interactive pet, being one of the few in the game that can respond directly to the player's actions. For example, if a player uses the dance emote, Mini Tyrael spreads its wings and starts dancing together with its owner, creating a very unique interaction. It also has special animations when the player is idle, and even possesses powerful abilities in pet battles, making it both visually appealing and useful. A truly unique and special item that every collector would love to have in their account. We go back in time to the year 2007, where Blizzard, during patch 2.3 of the Burning Crusade expansion, decided to introduce a curious NPC in Dustwallow Marsh, known as the Grim Totem Spirit Wolf. A ghostly wolf that was summoned by Tauren shamans from the area when we faced them. In addition to the game that took some time to be noticed by the players, as they were more focused on the new content of the expansion, and the old areas were only visited by those who were still leveling up. Until, well, one day, a hunter who was wandering around the area realized that these ghostly beasts summoned by the Taurens were, in fact, tameable beasts. The problem was that the channeling time to tame a pet back then was 20 seconds, while summoning these wolves only lasted about 5 seconds. This is why many hunters gave up and thought these beasts would be impossible to tame, even thinking it was nothing more than a cruel joke by Blizzard towards the hunter community. But, well, there was something Blizzard hadn't considered, and that is that the beast mastery ability of hunters was directly affected by the spell haste attribute, also known as spell haste, an attribute capable of reducing the casting time of a player's spells. That's when hunters began to develop theories and combinations that could lead them to achieve their ultimate goal of taming this ghostly wolf, which, despite being quite common today in WoW, was something completely new and desired by players back in 2007. And well, they had to come up with a way to reduce the cast time by about 15 whole seconds. These hunters finally did it. By combining 5 different effects that increase speed, they managed to shorten the time to tame a beast from those long 20 seconds to just 5. A combo that consisted of the Bloodlust buff from Shamans, the Burst UU consumable, obtainable in Wintergrasp, the Battle Drums from the Leatherworking Profession, the Troll racial ability, and the proc from the mystical Skyfire Diamond, a meta gem from those times. This was the most popular combination for doing the trick, but obviously it was also possible to do this without the drums and without the Troll racial, so even other races were able to master it. But yes, they obviously had to find other items or skills that would give them that speed buff. And that's how the hunters managed to tame their first spectral wolf in less than 5 seconds. Something completely unexpected for Blizzard. Indeed, the metagem was essential and irreplaceable for performing this trick, as when it proceeded, it reduced the casting time of the next spell by 50%. So, well, it couldn't be done without this item. And the first object capable of carrying a metagem embedded within it was a level 66 helmet. So only players level 66 and above could acquire this pet. After the hunters started spreading the rumor among their fraternities, each time, more and more people were acquiring this new pet. And in the official game forums, a wide variety of posts from users began to appear, asking Blizzard if this had been planned for players to come up with a way to tame this very special pet, or if it was just a mistake, and they were planning to make her untamable in the future. To which an official Blue response said that although this had not been something premeditated by the development team, they saw it as a very fun way to take advantage of the different mechanics of the game, and therefore decided to let the hunters continue taming her. 3 Doritos later, the ghostly wolves were removed in the next hotfix, added by Blizzard during patch 2.3.2. That is to say, yes, a little more than a month after they said they wouldn't remove it. With all this, the players obviously felt that they had been lied to directly and were angry about this decision. But to be fair to Blizzard, they technically didn't lie, since what they said was that they wouldn't make this beast become untamable. Now, that doesn't mean they wouldn't remove her from the game and replace her with another wolf that's exactly the same, but with the characteristic that it can't be tamed. That's great, the last thing was exactly what they did. So in the end, it's the same, only they managed to avoid lying, quote unquote. However, Blizzard decided to allow those players who had tamed it to keep this pet, which obviously seems like a good move to me. Well, that's how everyone who managed to capture this curious pet back then, and still has it today, has something truly unique in their account with a very interesting story behind it. Oh, and by the way, Blizzard redeemed themselves a bit in Cataclysm by introducing Karoma, a spirit wolf with the same design as this previous pet. Only this time, it was an officially tameable beast, with the great difference that it was an exotic beast that only beast hunters could carry. While, of course, the other one, the previous one, can be used by any of the 3 hunter specializations, which obviously makes it much more special. If we keep digging a little into the history of World of Warcraft, we will find many other exotic creatures that were never intended as pets for hunters, but nevertheless they managed to figure out how to tame them. Well, one of them was the famous Garwal, the Worgen, which during the Wrath of the Lich King expansion became one of the rarest and most powerful pets every hunter wanted to have. Garwal was a level 71 wolf that could be found in the Howling Fjord area on the continent of Northrend. Although it seemed like just another ordinary wolf, this was actually an illusion to hide its true form as a Worgen, a shape that only he could control, unlike other wargs that can hide in human form, but never in wolf form. And well, this wasn't even the whole challenge of finding this beast. But Garwal was also completely hidden from the player's eyes, and no one was able to find it unless they were on a specific mission. This is because Garwal was the target of the final mission in a series of missions in this area. So it was crucial to complete these initial missions if you wanted to find him and tame him. If you had already completed the quest chain without knowing that this could be done, unfortunately your hunter would never again be able to meet this NPC. Now, this was not the only challenge in having a warg as a pet, but the process of taming it was also somewhat difficult if we did not know the correct procedure, potentially even leading to its death or losing this pet forever if done incorrectly. This is because Garwal was divided into 2 different NPCs with distinct IDs within the game's files, one being the wolf that could be tamed, and the other the Worgen, which transformed when its health was below 50, and obviously could not be tamed as it was considered a humanoid. And if he tamed it during its wolf form, it would simply be just another wolf like any other in the game. So the trick here was to make it turn into a warg while we were taming it in wolf form. But the problem was that when its health dropped below 50, the channeling of Tame Beast was automatically cancelled. So the only possible way in which the hunters could get Garwal in his heron form, Hwargen form, was to finish channeling their beast taming spell at the exact moment he transformed. Basically, they had to achieve perfect timing like only a few can manage for this to work. There were 2 strategies that were viable for that. The first was to bring Garwal down to 55% health. Freeze it with a freezing trap. Start the taming process there, and then make it fall into a fire trap so that the damage would cause it to transform just when the beast taming process was about to finish. And, well, the other method, even simpler, was to bring it to 60% health, use Draclian Sting on it, and start taming it when there are between 14 to 13 seconds left of the effect of this sting, which first put the target to sleep and then dealt damage per second upon waking up. In this way, many of us who played with a hunter during Wrath of the Lich King were able to tame a worgen with wolf abilities, which not only had a great size and an amazing and totally unique appearance, but was also one of the best types of pets for doing PvE content. So, well, it was basically a wolf pet. But, well, the real problem was not capturing it, but rather keeping it, since Blizzard realized very quickly about this big mistake and decided to address it directly. While Blizzard had previously allowed players to keep other non-player characters, which were not initially intended as pets, in this case they first reverted Garwal to being an untamable creature, as expected, but they did not stop there. They also decided to make players who already had it lose control over it, since it was no longer considered a pet by the game. Garwal lost his talent tree, lost his special abilities, and lost his level scaling. Additionally, hunters lost their ability to feed it, so it quickly became unhappy and ended up leaving you. Unless, of course, you had the glyph of Mend Pet, which allowed you to keep your active pet's happiness level high. But well, with all other systems, talents, and abilities removed, Garwal became nothing more than a simple trophy pet for all those who still had it, being completely useless in combat, but serving as a nice accessory. Sometime later, Blizzard, the fun police, dealt the final blow and decided to change Garwal's model to that of a common white wolf. So no one else was able to have the worgen, not even as a simple decoration. Finally, we have a hunter's pet so bizarre that we can even side with Blizzard for removing it from the game. Because, well, it wasn't a bugged wolf, a worgen, or a slime. It was literally fire. Yes, a piece of fire on the ground. The story takes place in the Southern Barrens, which is the post-Cataclysm version of the famous zone from classic WoW known simply as the Barrens. And, well, with the update to the world of Azeroth that came with Cataclysm, we saw the birth of new scenarios, new creatures, and new missions in zones like these. So as players discovered all the new content this place had to offer, they encountered a new quest chain, in which they would undertake a quest called Planting the Solution, where they were given a packet of seeds to heal various wild creatures that had mutated in the area. The interesting thing here was that this was a kind of experimental medicine. So some attempts to cure the animals were successful. The creature was cured and left happy, but other attempts were an absolute failure, causing the animals to become enraged and attack us, and in the worst case, the animal we wanted to cure simply exploded. Upon seeing this, the hunter said, "Can I have an explosion as a pet?" And indeed, Jimmy, yes, you can have an explosion as a pet. Yay! And it is because, thanks to the experience of having been able to tame a pet at the exact moment of transforming into a worgen during the previous expansion, hunters thought about applying this same technique here, but this time before a raptor or a bird explodes. But now it was even more complicated, as the window of time the hunter had to tame this beast before its sad end was even smaller. Even smaller than Jimmy's chances of getting a girlfriend in the real world. Hey! The solution to this problem was to get external help. That is, to bring a friend to the mission, start the process of taming the animal, and have your friend use the seed item just when there is only a millisecond left before it finishes. Indeed, they should repeat this process several times, since it was not known when the explosion would be triggered. Because remember, the animal could heal, get angry, or explode. But well, when it did explode, the hunter just had to revive their pet, and it would come back to life as a piece of fire. Yes, literally a walking fire that followed you everywhere and worked exactly the same way, with the same stats and abilities as a pet raptor or strider, depending, of course, on which of these two you captured. So while everyone was trying to tame the new spirit wolf, the penis terror, or the Uldum scorpion, others said, "No thanks, I want the walking campfire." So, well, the interesting thing is that this fire moved, chased enemies, and attacked like any other normal pet. That is, it was usable, and not just something decorative. But, well, of course, Blizzard decided to remove it in patch 4.2.2, and made it impossible for players who had it to keep it by changing the pet model to its original animal form. Usually we would make a joke here or criticize Blizzard for ruining the fun, but in this case, I think we have to give them credit. In the tranquil fields of Elwynn Forest was Hogger, a huge gnoll waiting eagerly for the adventurers who had accepted the mission to eliminate him, or who simply had the bad luck of passing near his camp. For many, this was the first elite creature they had to face in this video game. And if you decided to fight against him alone, it was ideal to be a couple of levels above, have a good plan, and have a few potions in your inventory if you at least wanted to try to survive. Since, well, the most convenient, or, well, the ideal was to do this fight accompanied. That is why the general chat of Elwynn Forest was filled with people looking to form a group in order to complete the mission. However, you were better off clearing the area first and never rushing in head first to pull it, as bringing all the gnolls from his team with him never ended well. But well, with help, the players managed to kill it. And the true reward was not just the experience from the mission or the green item it gave, but rather having learned to cooperate with other people to overcome a common challenge. In fact, Hogger was so iconic that Blizzard even added a counter in the statistics selection that shows you how many times your character has been killed by the gnoll. Entire groups of level 1 characters were even organized to face him, creating epic and very entertaining battles that many still remember to this day. In this way, Hogger became the first great lesson in teamwork, and one of the WoW villains that instilled the most fear in the hearts of players. The next one on the list is the feared Son of Arugal. Yes, the same elite creatures of level 24 or 25 that we used to see inside the Shadowfang Keep, but which also spread terror in the open world. These were not mere beasts, but rather the most powerful creations made by the Archmage Arugal, who was responsible for spreading the Vorgon curse on the humans of Azeroth, and leading a cult that spread terror throughout Silverpine Forest. These Vorgon, infused with their essence, freely patrolled the area, hunting any unsuspecting player doing quest there. These creatures became famous for killing without warning. You would be gathering herbs, completing missions, or simply crossing the forest, and suddenly you'd hear a loud roar and see one of these worgons charging at full speed towards your character. And in just a few seconds, you were already walking as a spirit, searching for your body. And even if you somehow managed to escape, the problem didn't end there, as these mobs would cast Arugal's Gift, a curse that dealt shadow damage to your character for 5 continuous minutes, draining your life until it ended, or until another player could remove it. Elite creatures that were higher level than the average in the area and had an absurdly wide aggro radius. Combined with their speed, they could spot you from very far away and pounce on you without giving you any time to react. In fact, on the heat maps of World of Warcraft Hardcore, where each character has only 1 life, we can see how the areas patrolled by these mobs appear completely shaded in red, because of all the players who lost their characters to these non-player characters. Now, if we talk about terrified players, of course we cannot forget about Duskwood, one of the first truly dark and eerie areas of World of Warcraft, where many players spent time around level 20. There, many dangerous enemies lurked, but one of them was forever marked in the players' memories. It is Stitches, the huge abomination created by the necromancer Abercrombie as a gift for the mayor of Darkshire. A very interesting story, but one that, well, we will be leaving for a future video. Dots appeared near Abercrombie's cabin and traveled all the way along the road towards Darkshire. The Night Watch, of course, tried to stop it, but most of the time they failed in the attempt. And without the help of the players, this abomination completely destroyed them, and continued on its way to reach the town of Darkshire and defeat everyone it could there. Being an elite mob much stronger than the players leveling up in the area, it was extremely common to die as soon as we encountered it. It was like this that hearing it scream and seeing it run towards us at full speed became a memory that many of us will never forget. And also in WoW Hardcore, things got even worse, as some higher level rogues used to provoke it, taking it to the inn in Darkshire, use Vanish to disappear and leave it there, unleashing real massacres among the people who were resting or handing in missions. Now we move on to a much more serious enemy, a real commander of the Burning Legion. I'm talking about Lord Kazakh, who came to Azeroth during Archimonde's invasion, and managed to survive the Third War, later taking refuge in the Blasted Lands. This was one of the first world bosses to be released in the original World of Warcraft, and in its early days, groups of 40 maximum level players attempted to defeat it. But Kazakh was incredibly powerful and did not make the fight easy for them. The worst part was that if a player died during this encounter, Kazakh would heal a large amount of health, extending the fight even further and potentially turning it into an endless disaster. Moreover, his skill set was quite powerful and capable of wiping out entire raids in a matter of seconds, thus being a huge danger for any player who decided to get too close to his spawn area. But well, his fame truly skyrocketed when some players managed to kite him to Stormwind, the human capital of the Alliance, where once there, inside the city, Kazakh unleashed total chaos, releasing endless shadow bolts that killed any player and non-player character they touched, turning the capital into a complete graveyard that only the game masters were able to stop. That is why in the history of World of Warcraft, Lord Kazakh is remembered as one of the non-player characters that instilled the most fear in the inhabitants of Azeroth. Finally, we traveled to the Burning Crusade, where many players were just beginning their adventure in Outland, until, well, they discovered what true terror is. The Fel Reaver, a gigantic demonic machine that patrolled the plains of Hellfire Peninsula, like a giant of metal and vile fire destroying everything in its path. This was a level 70 elite, huge, noisy, and capable of crushing players with a single stomp. Its presence made the players' screens shake, and that unforgettable sound announced that we were about to die, and there was absolutely nothing to do. If he saw you, you were literally just seconds away from dying if you couldn't escape. This is how Fel Reaver became the main cause of countless deaths during the initial leveling in the Burning Crusade, creating a shared paranoia among players who nervously looked around constantly, fearing that this gigantic mechanical demon could be behind them. And when many of them finally reached level 80 during the next expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, the first thing they did was go back to Outland, seeking revenge, putting an end to this feared NPC who, well, bullied us so much when we were weaker. We begin our journey in the Alterac Mountains, where patrolling almost every path in this zone, and even a part of the Hillsbrad foothills, we can find Norilisans, a rare level 44 elite in the shape of a red dragon, who for a long time was the absolute terror of many players doing quests and leveling in the area. This is because he not only outmatched the player in size, but also had much more health and strength than they did. This is why no one wanted to encounter him alone. Norilisans was immune to fire, fear, stuns, and other movement-reducing abilities. He had over 12,000 health points. Each of his basic attacks dealt 300 to 400 damage. He breathed fire in a cone in front of him, and he was even capable of healing himself. Therefore, this was not a mob that a player of comparable level could defeat solo. He often gave trouble even to players who were 10 or even 15 levels above him. So, if you planned to face him, your only option was to form a group with other people to at least have a chance to defeat him. An effort that, by the way, was not at all well rewarded, since the only thing you got upon defeating him was 6 or 7 silver coins, and, if you were lucky, a green item that was hardly worth it. Even so, many players still remember him for the great terror he caused them when leveling in the zone, where many of them still keep screenshots of the first time they crossed paths with him. A dragon with power vastly superior to that of the players, who dropped nothing special, and absolutely no one knew why he was there. Furthermore, during the vanilla beta, he had 2 different models, having been a full-sized red dragon and even a chromatic drake at some point in the beta, before ending up as the red drake we all knew. Norilisans has no official explanation in the lore. Blizzard never assigned him a story, quest, or even a simple line of dialogue, and his presence in the Alterac Mountains was never explained during the game. Therefore, everything indicates that he was a red dragonflight dragon added during the early development of vanilla, who remained in the world without a defined purpose when part of Alterac's content was cut before launch, a zone known in development history for having a large amount of cut content. Today, he is not even in the game outside of WoW Classic, so his reason for being will forever remain a mystery. We now move to Duskwood, where a creature not as exotic as a great red dragon was hiding, but one that did manage to grab the attention of thousands of players, especially hunters. I'm talking about Lupos, a rare level 23 mob that at first glance was just another white wolf roaming the zone, but he had a secret that very few knew at the time. His attacks dealt shadow damage instead of physical damage every time he struck. Something that, in the early days, made him the ultimate PvP pet. This is because shadow damage completely ignored player armor, as players only started to obtain and accumulate shadow resistance on their gear for certain raid encounters in the later phases of the game. So, for the rest of the game, hunters who tamed Lupos had a huge advantage over other players, both in battlegrounds and in the open world. Every one of Lupos' attacks and abilities diminished the health of enemy players without this damage being mitigated by their armor. It is for this reason that all hunters wanted to tame him, and groups of players formed up to camp the area for long hours to get him. A mob that had a respawn time of between 4 to 6 hours, so the wait times were long, and due to the high demand, few managed to capture him at first. Furthermore, he wasn't just camped for taming. Many players wanted to eliminate him directly for his loot, as the items he dropped included some that were quite decent at this level range, such as the Lupos' Pelt, a cloak that granted 18 armor points, along with 3 agility and 2 stamina. Nothing out of the ordinary, but quite useful for some players. However, the main thing here was the shadow damage he dealt and how broken he was when doing PvP, which is why Blizzard ended up neutralizing Lupos' great power in patch 1.9 in 2006, where they introduced changes to the pet system. And since then, all wolves, Lupos included, started dealing normal physical damage with their basic attacks, thus ending forever the reign and relevance of this highly sought-after pet. We now head to the Blasted Lands, where a large max-level Black Dragon Elite became one of the greatest threats in original WoW. I'm talking about Taramis the Devourer, who, unlike other rares, did not have particularly valuable loot sought after by players, nor was he linked to any important quest. However, he became legendary for something very different. Players discovered that he could be kited over enormous distances without resetting. Taking advantage of this, some would drag him to capital cities like Ironforge or Stormwind, where Taramis would begin killing NPCs and low-level players without anyone being able to do anything to stop him. Yes, the story of Lord Khazak was repeating itself once more, but this time it was a dragon terrifying the area. where for long minutes and even entire hours these cities became completely unusable. A dragon that dealt hard physical blows, breathed fire on everyone in front of him, and also drained the health of nearby players to heal, making him quite difficult to eliminate. And although Blizzard claims to have nerfed the distance these NPCs can chase you so that these things can no longer be done, reality shows us the opposite, as this happened again in World of Warcraft Classic, also in Season of Discovery, and we have even seen it occur in hardcore realms. So it seems this is an ancient threat that continues to cause chaos among players even today. Let's move on now to the Cataclysm expansion, where we saw the birth of Ahn'Qiraj, a rare stone dragon who is responsible for one of the most obsessive mount farms in WoW's history. Ahn'Qiraj is a Proto-Drake from the Deepholm Abyss that appears sporadically in different areas near the Temple of Earth. He doesn't have an important narrative role, nor does he represent a great threat to players. But what is eye-catching is what he carries in his loot table. As upon eliminating him, we will obtain the Reins of the Phosphorescent Stone Drake, a unique flying mount with a truly attractive appearance for the time. And well, even today it remains an extremely beautiful mount. However, farming it was anything but pretty, as it is often said that this is the spiritual heir to the famous time-lost Proto-Drake from Wrath of the Lich King, a mount also guaranteed to drop from a rare mob. But unlike that one, the way to obtain the Ahn'Qiraj mount was much more unique, as it wasn't just about killing him and looting him like any other mob. You had to mount him. When this dragon appeared, the first player who managed to reach him would be able to climb onto him, ride him, and fight against him on his back while he was in full flight. Ahn'Qiraj didn't fight back, but he did call for help from younger dragons to defend him. So if you managed to repel these dragons and defeat Ahn'Qiraj before dying, then his body would fall to the ground while your character would begin to descend slowly on a parachute to finally loot your reward, the guaranteed mount that the entire server wanted. A very original and fun way to get this highly desired mount. Now, Ahn'Qiraj's rarity was, at the very least, absurd. He only had a few fixed spawn locations in Deepholm, and like the Proto-Drake from the previous expansion, he also shared a respawn timer with another NPC called Bloodseeker, which was a bat that appeared 15 times more frequently than the dragon. So if you dedicated yourself to camping Ahn'Qiraj's spawn zones for long hours, you were surely met by this mob in his place more than once, which meant having to wait again between 6 to over 22 hours for one of the two to come out. He was literally that Zubat nobody wanted to find in the Pokemon caves while trying to catch an Onyx. This is how this rare caused absolute chaos on WoW servers during those times, with large numbers of people camping the zone at once, long wait times, and players' hearts breaking into pieces every time this bat appeared instead of the dragon they were waiting for. But in Cataclysm, there was also another rare mount that revolutionized the entire server, this time causing economic chaos among players. This is Poseidus, a rare level 81 hippocampus that swims in the depths of Vashj'ir. He was widely camped by players who wanted to earn an economic return in the form of gold, as Poseidus dropped the mount Reins of Poseidus, which granted an abyssal seahorse as an aquatic mount. This had two great qualities. The first is that it could be used in any water zone, and the second is that it was an item that bound on equip. In other words, it could be sold on the auction house. So during Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria, the Reins of Poseidus were one of the most expensive mounts on the game's market, reaching prices ranging from tens of thousands to millions of gold on certain servers. This is how it became the #1 target for professional gold farmers. However, finding him was not a simple task, as there were only 5 known spawn locations, and his respawn time was approximately 72 to 120 hours. Yes, sometimes you had to wait up to 5 full days to finally see him. This made him one of the hardest rares to find, and one of the hardest mounts to get. Players mounted underwater guards using multiple characters at each spawn point, and even formed alliances between players from different servers to change realms by forming a group in the hope of finding him active in one of the different layers. Therefore, encountering this rare was a true odyssey, something that enveloped this creature in a kind of mystique that only served to increase the mount's value on the auction house. Later, during the Legion expansion, Blizzard drastically reduced Poseidus' rarity, lowering his reappearance time to just 4 to 7 hours, adding that if you defeated him in a group, all members obtained the mount equally. This enormously facilitated access to it and sent its auction price plummeting. Some may agree with this decision, but at least personally, it seems completely unnecessary and pointless to reduce the rarity and exclusivity of a mount from several expansions ago that is part of content that is hardly relevant today. What are your thoughts? Let me know your opinions below in the comments. We're going back to the year 2005, which for many players has been considered the golden age of WoW, or, well, at least of course, one of the periods that generates the most nostalgia. I'm, of course, talking about the game's original vanilla version before any expansions had been released. It was at this point that a particular rare creature managed to become the absolute obsession of every single hunter. The creature in question was none other than Broken Tooth. A level 37 lion that would appear in the Barren Lands, and at first glance it didn't seem special in any way. Instead, it looked like just another ordinary lion, and it didn't drop any valuable items either. So then, why was it so highly sought after by all the players? Well, what truly made it special was its attack speed, which was only 1 second. And in those days, this was considered the absolute fastest speed in the entire game, completely outclassing all other creatures whose attack speeds would typically vary between 1.2 and 2.5 seconds. For this reason, Broken Tooth was truly considered the Ferrari among all hunter pets, the one that absolutely everyone yearned to acquire. It was therefore the case that for vanilla hunters, and obviously also for those in Classic, taming Broken Tooth meant having a companion that was significantly more efficient when it came to dealing damage, DPS. For this reason, players would constantly camp this area, waiting for the lengthy respawn time of this NPC, which would take approximately 6 to 8 hours to reappear after it had been tamed or eliminated by another player. And yes, all hunters wanted it. So you had to be prepared to face other players from the opposing faction if you wanted to get it. Or else wait in long lines, as happened in WoW Classic, to tame this pet when it was your turn. Which is why this rare was not only one of the most sought after throughout all of Classic and Vanilla, but it also transformed the Blasted Lands into a genuine war zone. Sometime later, with the opening of the Xal'Nerub raid, a new creature also emerged, known as the Bloodseeker Bat, which for the very first time was able to match the speed of Broken Tooth. Thus, players finally had an alternative pet that possessed the same speed. And so, even though this particular one wasn't a rare find, the players also went completely insane trying to capture and tame it. The next character on our list is also a non-player character who made his initial appearance in the original WoW Vanilla, specifically within the desolate and dangerous lands of the Western Plaguelands, where you could encounter an undead human rare named Lord Maldazar, which did not become a legend due to its extreme strength or for dropping incredibly powerful items, but instead it was because of a bug that took over 6 years to finally be corrected. It's just that ever since Vanilla, Lord Maldazar had this nasty habit of appearing beneath the ground in the Hill of Sorrows. What this meant was that players would see his marker on the minimap, and they could select him, but they couldn't hit him in any way because he was completely glitched beneath the earth. And even worse, if you were a relatively low-level player and happened to pass near the zone, Maldazar would begin to unleash shadow blasts upon you from the very depths of the underworld, swiftly reducing your character's health to 0 before you could even comprehend what was attacking you. And this is how this rare individual managed to become a local legend, and many now refer to him as the Phantom Sharpshooter of the Hill of Pain. Well, actually, nobody calls it that. I just made it up, but it fits pretty well. Anyway, this was simply a bugged rare mob that annoyed any player trying to level in the zone, or just passing through. But finally, in 2011, with the release of Cataclysm, Blizzard decided to completely fix this bug. Or, to be more precise, they didn't fix it because, well, they simply completely removed the NPC from the game, along with many others who were erased from the face of Azeroth, due to the major changes this world underwent in that expansion. And so, the Ghost Sniper, known to everyone, becomes just another legend that will forever live on in the memories of a select few players. We now travel to the year 2008 and make our way to the icy, stormy peaks in the new continent of Northrend, which we first encountered during the expansion of Wrath of the Lich King, where one of the most famous legends in the entire history of WoW was born, the time-lost Proto-Drake. Oh, well, the Proto-Drake of Lost Time, as many used to call it, due to the great number of hours you had to waste to acquire it. This impressive golden Proto-Drake was the absolute embodiment of that well-known saying, "Good things come to those who wait." Because upon its defeat, this rare creature was guaranteed to drop its mount, the Reins of the Lost Time Proto-Drake, a true status symbol that really made you stand out among all the other players, and which, well, even to this very day, it still remains so, given that only 11% of all World of Warcraft accounts currently possess one. This rare spawned every 2 to 8 hours, on the dot, so players would camp the area, hoping to be the first to find it. To achieve this, large raiding parties were formed, the zone was constantly scoured, and even add-ons were used that emitted an alert sound when a rare appeared in the area. However, this rare was not so easy to find, because in most cases when your add-on NPC scan sounded its alarm, the one who actually appeared was not this Proto-Drake, but another dragon named Viragosa, another rare creature that patrolled the very same area and shared the exact same respawn timer as the Proto-Drake. But, well, this one, in comparison, dropped absolutely nothing that was truly interesting. So, unlike what happens with all the other rares, this last one was absolutely nobody's desired encounter, as it meant you had to defeat it and then wait another 2 to 8 hours more for a minimal chance to find the Proto-Drake and not Viragosa again. But anyway, you almost always ended up finding Viragosa, since she had a much higher chance of appearing. And so, players would spend countless hours, days, weeks, and even much longer periods of time traversing this vast map in search of their highly coveted mount, as if this entire ordeal had been a macabre, well-orchestrated plan by Blizzard to keep you perpetually hooked on the game and continuously paying your subscription fees. Even today, the time-lost Proto-Drake remains a living legend among players, and despite new expansions and hundreds of mounts that have been added over time, very few are capable of giving you the aura that parading with this golden dragon in front of everyone else gives you. We continue moving forward in time, and now we finally reach the Mists of Pandaria expansion, where we encountered a truly unique and special rare that managed to blend the concept of being a massive rare NPC with also being a type of puzzle. This was Alani, the red thundering cloud serpent that would constantly fly over the Valley of the Eternal Blossom in the continent of Pandaria. Alani was visible to everyone, a majestic and elegant red nimbus dragon, enveloped in lightning, circling the sky for all to see. The players, but despite being able to see it and reach it with great ease, no one could attack it because it was protected by an invisible shield, which could only be destroyed if the players managed to gather a special item called the Sky Crystal. This crystal was obtained by collecting 10 Sky Shards, which were ultra-rare item that would drop from any enemy in Pandaria with an extremely low chance, one that was well below 1. Many players would spend entire weeks farming in the valley, defeating Zollies and Mobus relentlessly, aiming to gather all the pieces. And you see, completing the collection of the 10 Sky Crystals was, in itself, the true feat. Because once these 10 fragments were combined, they would transform into the much-desired Sky Crystal, a powerful item that could be aimed directly at Alani to shatter his invisible shield and finally be able to fight him. It was a truly spectacular sensation, the one that was felt, to bring him crashing down from the sky. And then, once he had been defeated, Alani would let his mount fall, a mount that was 100% guaranteed. It's also worth mentioning that to learn how to properly use this mount, you needed to have achieved Exalted Reputation with the August Celestials, and also possess the skill to ride Cloud Serpents. You know, just typical Pandaria things, which of course added even more exclusivity to this particular mount. This is how Alani turned into a major enterprise for many players who lacked a personal life, spending their entire days farming crystals, and once they successfully formed the Sky Crystal, they would then sell the kill to other players in exchange for significant amounts of gold. Because any member of the group who participated in this encounter and looted the spoils from this rare would obtain this beautiful mount. Ultimately, this is how this dragon became not only one of the hardest mounts to get in the entire expansion, but also one of the rares that made the biggest impact in the game's history. And finally, we moved on to Warlords of Draenor, where Blizzard significantly increased the difficulty for those specific rare enemies that dropped guaranteed mounts. And the most legendary one from this entire expansion was, without a shadow of a doubt, Fist of Libra, a gigantic Grond that would appear in the Gorgoron zone, and its respawn time was among the longest in the entire game, ranging from 48 to 96 real-time hours. That means 2 to 4 real-world days of waiting for this rare to appear after it's been eliminated. This meant you would basically see it appear on your server about 2 times a week. And when it finally did show up, it would only be a matter of a few minutes before it was hunted down by players who had been camping for long hours at its various spawn points, just eagerly awaiting its appearance. But why such great interest in this rare? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it would drop these enormous guaranteed mount to all those members of the group who managed to defeat it. A mount that made the community go absolutely crazy in ways. Incredibly creative, as Excel spreadsheets were made to track the times of its last sightings, conspiracy theories were formed on forums about how to make it appear, and even Druid players created in-game rituals trying to summon Libra Fist, using their nature magic. Obviously a completely pointless endeavor. But come on, you have to understand these people. They needed something to do to keep themselves entertained while they waited for 48 to 96 hours, camping without moving from the very same spot. That was absolutely crazy. First of all, we have what many of us might consider a combined entry, since, well, it's not just a single pet, and you'll soon understand why. But first of all, let me tell you a bit about the story of Hati. And when the Legion expansion was released back in the year 2016, each class in the game gained access to their own artifacts, powerful weapons linked to their class, each with a strong presence within the game's lore, such as Doomhammer for enhancement shamans, the Scythe of Elune for balanced druids, or the Ashbringer for retribution paladins. These weapons were used throughout the expansion, and with one weapon for each of the specs of each class, hunters could choose between 3 different options: Titan's Fury for beast hunters, Tazdora for marksmanship, and Talonclaw for survival. The curious thing was that by equipping the new beast specialization weapon, the hunter gained permanent access for the first time in the game's history to a second pet, which was named Hati. This used the model of the wolves from Draenor, and had a striking electric effect around it. But what many players do not know about this is that the version of Hati we all originally knew was going to use an older wolf model instead, specifically the Northrend wolf from the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. This was the case throughout the entire Legion beta, but due to several complaints from players who tested that beta and demanded a slightly more modern creature model that would better fit with the new updated graphics of Legion, and not use an old model from past expansions. From more than 8 years ago, Blizzard decided to change it at the last minute, just before the launch of the Legion pre-patch. Additionally, the beta players said that not all hunters like wolves. And yes, I know, how can you not like wolves? Just look at this handsome one. But anyway, the players asked for a solution so they wouldn't have to necessarily use a wolf as a pet throughout Legion. And Blizzard also responded positively to these demands, allowing hunters to complete a mission in their class hall that would reward them with the special item called the Essence Swapper, which was capable of modifying Hati's appearance and copying the model of another beast that the hunter wanted. At first, this seemed like an excellent idea, and during the first days of the expansion, hunters copied their favorite rare pets, or made curious combinations using this item. But as I say, all this was done at the last minute, so sooner or later some error would appear that the players would take advantage of to exploit, as they discovered that any temporary effect that changed the appearance of their pets could be copied onto Hati, and it would remain active forever. So we began to see increasingly more rare and extreme. And one of the most interesting was turning Hati into a demon. By using the Essence Exchanger on their pet, while it was under the effect of a curse applied by some orcs from the Burning Blade clan inside a cave in a simple leveling area of Durotar, Hati transformed into this dark being. Well, since this little trick was so easy and quick to perform, in no time, the world of Azeroth was filled with hunters using a demon as a pet. That is why, as the bug became so popular, Blizzard ended up nerfing it quickly. But note that Blizzard only nerfed the transformation of this curse itself so that Hati cannot be a demon, and not the way Hati transformed, so players went to explore different areas, dungeons, and specific missions where similar effects could be found, and ended up transforming their pet into giant murlocs, gnomes, humans, skeletons, and even a dwarf from Uldaman by using the Essence Exchanger during a quest. But well, we all know how this ended. Sometime later, Blizzard decided to nerf this exploit and reset all the Hati to their original form, regardless of whether you had taken advantage of the exploit or not. So both everyone who took advantage of this bug to get a rare pet and those who did absolutely nothing ended up being affected by this measure. Let's move on to something a bit simpler, but that, well, undoubtedly managed to catch a lot of players' attention back then. I'm talking about the Kuriashi larva, which was the only green worm in the entire game since it was added during patch 1.11.1. But only in patch 5.1, that is, during the Mists of Pandaria expansion, did it become tameable by hunters. To obtain it, all you had to do was head to the Ungoro crater, and then, inside one of the Silithid caverns, in the Shimmering Scar area, we had to provoke the mother Sarpa Savas, a rare that appeared in the nest of these creatures. And now the only thing to do was simply let her attack us and wait for her to drop an egg on the ground, from which our dear little green friend would emerge, who, despite being just a miserable worm, was considered by the game as a tameable beast. And the most curious thing of all was that upon taming it, it went from being a small and cute little green thing to transforming into this giant monstrosity that you are seeing right now on the screen, which stood out a lot compared to other pets, especially when we walked around with the creature outside in the capital cities. And finally, we have the Emerald Dream Wolf Pup. The cutest, most beautiful, adorable, and cuddly pet you will find in this game right after the green worm we just saw. And, well, as its name suggests, it was a little wolf pup that could be found in the Emerald Dream. And yes, as exotic as it may seem, this was considered by the game as a tameable beast. The problem was that hunters had no way to access this new area, as it was a place specially designed for druids. And since there was no way to get the wolf out of the area, the only option left was for the hunter to be teleported there to tame it. Something that, well, seemed impossible, since only druids had the ability to travel to this place that was special for them. And what many thought was to ask a warlock to summon them there. But of course, warlocks are not druids, so they couldn't access it either. And it was here where the players, as always, managed to find an ingenious solution. And this time, it was thanks to the Recruit a Friend program, which, well, had a system that provided different benefits for 90 days, so you could bring a friend to play and level up faster with them. One of these benefits was an ability with a cooldown of only 30 minutes called Summon Friend, with which, regardless of your class, you could summon your friend to almost any place in the world of Azeroth. And, well, one of those places was, of course, this area of the Emerald Dream. So the task was very simple. You recruited a friend to play, or, well, you created a second account if you didn't have friends, created a warlock, and used your druid to summon it to the area. Once there, you just needed the help of another druid around to summon your hunter, and simply tamed the cub as if it were any other beast in the game. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Why not summon a hunter directly? Well, you would have to level it from scratch to a high level before you could capture it. So, well, the best way was to do it with a warlock, and then you could simply summon your lifelong hunter that you had in your personal account, or any of your other characters. This way you got your cute puppy pet, and well, then you happily walked it around for everyone to see. Sadly, friends, as soon as this was discovered, Blizzard fixed the bug at the speed of light, and all the players who got it saw their wolf pups turn into ordinary, common, and adolescent wolves shortly after obtaining them.
The first records we're going to talk about today are not related to in-game mechanics themselves, but rather to the endurance limits of the human body. More specifically, players who managed to take their obsession with World of Warcraft to truly ridiculous levels. And one of the most extreme cases was even officially recorded by the Guinness World Records. In the year 2024, a Hungarian chef named Barnabas, whose last name I honestly don't even dare to attempt to pronounce, decided to play World of Warcraft completely non-stop for almost 60 hours straight while streaming the entire thing live, achieving the world record for the longest continuous session playing an online role-playing game with 59 hours and 20 consecutive minutes spent inside Azeroth. During that time, he was running dungeons, doing arenas, and completing different activities together with his friends without sleeping or resting even for a moment. To survive this insane marathon, Barnabas consumed around 15 liters of water and, interestingly enough, completely avoided coffee or energy drinks, saying that he wanted to keep his mind as clear and focused as possible. But the real problem came later, because after around 45 hours of continuous gameplay, this player claimed that he began experiencing visual hallucinations caused by severe mental exhaustion. And even so, he managed to ignore all the warning signs his body was giving him, and eventually secured his place in the Guinness World Records as one of the most obsessive World of Warcraft players ever recorded. But if you already thought that was absurd enough, wait until you hear the next story, because there are players whose obsession is not measured by the number of hours played, but by the number of characters they create. One of the most famous examples is Des Mephisto, a player known throughout the community for something that honestly sounds almost unreal. This player managed to level up to the maximum level 49 characters of the exact same class. And not just any class, but 49 warriors, repeating the same zones, the same quests, and the same mechanics again and again until almost 50 identical characters were fully completed. And the most incredible part is that Des Mephisto is also famous for something else: speed leveling records, meaning the ability to level characters up in extremely short amounts of time compared to the average player. But the positive side of this story is that this player was also able to use his recognition inside the game to raise awareness about autism, turning that extreme repetition into a way to support several charitable causes through the popularity he gained. Even so, for the average World of Warcraft player, the idea of leveling 49 warriors to maximum level is something that simply makes no sense at all. And believe me when I say that this is still absolutely nothing compared to some of the records we will see next. Now, beyond leveling dozens of characters, there is something that can be even more dangerous for anyone's free time: trying to complete absolutely everything that exists inside a game. Within the community, this is known as completionism, the obsession with unlocking every achievement, every pet, every mount, every title, and every possible collectible item, something that quickly becomes a complete black hole of time for this type of player. One of the most extreme examples of this obsession happened in the year 2018, when a Swedish player named Zin'rokh achieved something that until that moment seemed practically impossible: becoming the first person in the world to complete every single achievement available during the Legion expansion. In total, 3,314 different achievements. And these were not simple achievements either, because some of them alone required several months of dedication for an average player, such as reaching Prestige 25 in Player versus Player, collecting 300 different mounts from that expansion, or winning 5,000 pet battles. But the truly absurd part appears when we look at the total time Zin'rokh had invested in the game. According to his statistics, he had spent more than 900 days of real-time playing the game, which is equivalent to roughly 21,600 hours inside World of Warcraft. And almost half of that time had been spent playing with a single character, a Blood Elf mage. When we talk about the in-game economy, there is a certain type of player whose main obsession is to accumulate ridiculous quantities of specific items. And the strangest part is that in many cases, those items are practically worthless. One of the most bizarre cases happened in the year 2023, when a player known as Grozez revealed a record that left the entire community completely confused. Because his achievement was not defeating an impossible raid boss or obtaining some ultra-rare mount, but instead accumulating 10 million fish. Specifically a fish called Lost Soul, a relatively common fishing item from the Shadowlands expansion that honestly has almost no value inside the game. And this is where the story becomes even more absurd, because to gather such an insane amount, Grozez spent 4 entire years collecting those fish. During that time, he spent approximately 900,000 gold purchasing them through the auction house, and he also personally fished more than 110,000 fish on his own. All of this effort was dedicated to accumulating an item that, realistically speaking, has absolutely no practical use at that scale. But the most curious detail of all is that Grozez himself said he has no intention of ever selling them. Instead, he wants to keep every single fish. So essentially, this player spent several years of his life creating what is probably the largest storage of completely useless fish in the entire history of World of Warcraft. But well, everyone is free to play however they want and enjoy the game in their own way. Let's just be grateful that, at least in World of Warcraft, fish do not expire, because otherwise someone would probably also hold the record for the stinkiest bank in the entire game. And of course, we cannot end this video about absurd records without mentioning one of the most famous records in the entire history of World of Warcraft. I'm talking about the Double Agent, the player known for playing the game without ever choosing a faction. As we all know, the game revolves largely around two main factions and their legendary rivalry, the Horde and the Alliance, a conflict that has existed for decades and defines much of the story of Azeroth. But this player simply decided that he would not participate in that conflict at all. Everything began with the expansion Mists of Pandaria, when Blizzard introduced the Pandaren race into the game. Players started their adventure in a special zone called the Wandering Isle, an isolated leveling area separated from the rest of the world where there was one very important rule. Once the storyline of that zone ended, the player was forced to choose one of the two factions to join, and only after making that decision could they leave the island and begin their real journey across Azeroth. Well, almost every player followed that path, except for one person who decided to do something completely unexpected. He chose to never select a faction at all. By refusing to make that choice, his character became permanently trapped on the Wandering Isle, an area originally designed for characters between level 1 and level 10. A place where there are no dungeons, no high-level content, no enemies that grant experience after a certain point, and essentially a zone where progression beyond that level cap simply shouldn't be possible. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Because Double Agent eventually discovered a small detail hidden within the game's mechanics. As many players know, gathering professions like herbalism or mining grant a tiny amount of experience whenever you collect resources. Normally, this amount is so small that for higher-level characters, it becomes completely irrelevant. But technically speaking, it is still experience. So this player decided to spend hours, days, and eventually entire weeks simply running in circles around the island, collecting flowers and minerals again and again for years. In total, it required 173 days of gameplay time, which equals approximately 4,164 hours. All of that time spent gathering resources on a small starting island. But thanks to that strategy and an almost unbelievable level of perseverance, he eventually achieved something nobody had ever done before. He became the first neutral character in the world to reach the maximum level without ever choosing a faction. And later on, he repeated the achievement in future expansions as well, managing to bring not just one, but multiple characters to maximum level while remaining completely neutral. Characters that cannot access high-level content, cannot trade, cannot join guilds, and cannot even explore most of the world of Azeroth. But despite those limitations, the story of Double Agent became so famous within the community that Blizzard themselves decided to do something quite special. During the Legion expansion, the developers added Double Agent as an NPC inside the Monk class headquarters. And that NPC does exactly what the real player spent years doing. Walking around the area, mining copper nodes again and again, collecting flowers, and slowly leveling up in his own unique way. A small in-game tribute to one of the strangest, most absurd, and most fascinating records we have ever seen in the history of World of Warcraft. If you played during the Battle for Azeroth pre-patch, then you were part of the War of the Thorns, an event that reignited the existing conflict between Horde and Alliance like never before. This was the first time in history that an event was specifically designed to deliberately provoke a war between the two factions. The story behind it was very simple. Varrock, Saurfang, and Sylvanas launched a brutal attack to capture Teldrassil, the famous World Tree, and the home of the Night Elves. The goal was to deny the Alliance control of the port of Darnassus, and in doing so, keep all the Azerite from the continent of Kalimdor, a natural resource that played a leading role during this expansion. Regarding the event itself, it was released part by part through different weekly missions that showed both perspectives of the story. If you were playing for the Horde, your mission was to attack, which meant advancing through Ashenvale and Darkshore to dismantle the Night Elves' defenses while taking down anyone who stood in your way. While, if you were part of the Alliance, Your mission was instead to desperately defend your allies and your territory, fighting against the Horde and their war machines, but also evacuating completely defenseless civilians. At the same time this was happening inside the game, Blizzard also released 2 short digital novels where they narrated each faction's point of view and explored the motivations of their leaders, which, of course, gave a much richer context to the event, especially for those who truly love the lore. But the absolute climax came with the final cinematic of the second week, where Sylvanas, after having completely brought down the elves' defenses, gives the order to burn the World Tree, along with all the elves and other civilians still living there. This impulsive and completely senseless destruction sparked very strong reactions from both sides. The players of the Alliance were filled with anger after seeing one of their most cherished places totally destroyed, while in the Horde, the more sadistic players celebrated, and others believed that the writers were turning them into simple cartoon villains, where their actions did not represent the concept of honor defended by Varrock Sarfang, with whom many Horde players strongly agreed, as, well, he had planned the invasion of Teldrassil, but never with the intention of actually burning the World Tree. The missions were full of chaos and, honestly, were incredibly fun. The cinematics were top-notch quality, and many players got hooked on World of Warcraft again because of this. A truly epic event, packed with action and heavy moral dilemmas, which clearly showed us that modern WoW is still capable of generating powerful emotions in the hearts of its players. With the burning of Teldrassil forever marked as one of the darkest and most memorable moments in the entire history of the game. We now move on to the event that many players today consider the best pre-expansion event in terms of gameplay that has ever existed. It is, of course, the Legion invasions we saw during the Legion pre-patch back in 2016. Here, the narrative was even simpler. The Burning Legion had returned in full force, and players had to defend the world of Azeroth from endless waves of demons. An event that was not only visually spectacular, but also used scaling technology to allow players of all levels to participate together in the defense of the world. So this time, absolutely everyone was united in defending Azeroth, not just those players at the maximum level. The invasions took place in specific areas of the classic world of Azeroth, both in Kalimdor and in the Eastern Kingdoms, and each of them consisted of 4 different stages. The first one was defending a strategic point. The second, eliminating lieutenants and commanders of the Legion. The third step was to patrol the open world to destroy demon structures and eliminate minor invasions marked on the map. And the fourth and final stage involved facing a demon lord of immense power that required the cooperation of large groups of players. The event was extremely popular, not just because it combined demons and spaceships, which, well, who doesn't like that? But also because of the massive amount of experience it provided to players, who could level up their alternate characters at a speed never seen before in the game. And combined with how addictive and rewarding this whole experience felt, we saw incredibly high player activity, making it a period where the game genuinely felt more alive than ever. Moreover, completing invasions rewarded you with nether shards, a currency that could be exchanged for high-level gear and unique transmog sets, which of course gave players even more reasons to keep logging in every single day. The event culminated with the war at Broken Shore, a moment where both the Horde and the Alliance suffered painful defeats, including the deaths of King Varian Wrynn and War Chief Vol'jin. This emotional weight, combined with hundreds of demonic ships visible in the skies of every major area of the game, created a unique atmosphere full of chaos and excitement that served perfectly as the gateway to one of the best expansions in the entire history of WoW. The pre-expansion event of Cataclysm had a strong impact on both players and the world of Azeroth, as its aim was to literally prepare us to witness the destruction of the original continents of the game that players loved so much. The thing is, well, unlike other expansions that simply added new areas to explore, Cataclysm decided to completely erase and rewrite the already existing classic zones of Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. The event, called Elemental Unrest, narrated the awakening of Deathwing, the infiltration of the Twilight's Hammer cult, and how they changed the shape of the world forever. The event unfolded through a narrative that progressively changed the game's environment. First, we had the Tremors. Months before this patch, players began noticing random earthquakes on their screens while playing. At first, there were subtle camera vibrations that happened occasionally, but over time, their intensity and frequency increased considerably, accompanied also by underground roaring sounds and effects of dust falling from the ceilings of taverns and city banks, which created great immersion and made us realize that something very disastrous was about to happen. Finally, the elemental invasion arrived, the absolute climax of this event, where elemental rifts simultaneously opened all over Azeroth, and earth, fire, air, and water elementals began launching coordinated assaults against the major capitals of both factions. During these attacks, city services were completely suspended, and players had to erect barricades, evacuate civilians, defeat elementals, and fight alongside their major leaders, such as Varian or Vol'jin, who came out into the streets to combat the elementals. By successfully repelling one of these invasions, portals would open inside the city, allowing players to enter classic dungeons where they would face event-exclusive bosses that dropped unique rewards. An event that ended with patch 4.0.3a, known as the Shattering, where players decided to spend the final hours before the server shut down visiting iconic locations in Azeroth that they knew would be destroyed or altered forever. A collective farewell to the old world of Azeroth that truly touched the hearts of millions of players. If we're talking about chaotic and destructive events, we simply cannot avoid mentioning the pre-expansion event of Wrath of the Lich King, where Blizzard decided to take the famous Corrupted Blood incident that happened back in Classic with the release of Xal'Nerub, but this time recreating it in a controlled and fully intentional way. In this event, known as the Invasion of the Plague, the return of the Lich King and his massive undead army was narrated, and the event itself unfolded through 3 very different phases. In the first one, some mysterious boxes appeared in Booty Bay, and when players interacted with them, they became infected with a strange disease that would turn them into zombies after 10 minutes, unless they were cured by the NPCs of the Argent Crusade or by other players. During the second day of the event, these boxes began to appear in much busier areas, inside the main capitals of each faction, where infected cockroaches started roaming the streets, and simply killing them would also immediately infect the player. The incubation time of this disease was reduced from 10 minutes to 5 minutes, and the resistance to the cure increased, so the infection began to spread faster and faster, and we could clearly see more and more zombies taking over the cities. On the third day, infected civilians started appearing in low-level areas, and zombies became increasingly visible everywhere and also much more powerful, until finally, during the last 2 days of the event, the incubation period dropped to just 1 minute, and the disease became almost completely incurable. So the healers of the Argent Crusade had abandoned the cities to their fate, and the real apocalypse had truly begun. All capital cities became completely unplayable. A total chaos where players who transformed into zombies spread the disease by attacking other players and also NPCs, making the already uncontrollable situation even worse. This had momentarily created a new faction of zombie players, a third faction that was hostile to both the Horde and the Alliance, and even had its own unique language in the game, allowing them to communicate with each other without the other two factions understanding what they were saying. And despite the enormous number of complaints on the forums from players begging for everything to please return to normal because they simply could not play the game, Blizzard stood firm and allowed the world of Azeroth to experience what it would be like to live through a real plague invasion. An event that also brought with it some rewards that today are considered legendary because of their extreme rarity. One of these was, of course, the Haunted Memento, an item that would drop from the plague invaders, and when carried in your inventory, a ghostly shadow would stalk the player every few seconds. Today, it is one of the most expensive and most coveted vanity items in the entire game. On the other hand, the boss Tenris Murkblood appeared in a secret area of the Karajan raid during this event, and he dropped the Arcanite Ripper, you know, the famous two-handed axe that transforms into an electric guitar and allows the player to play a rock solo. This event also introduced the exclusive Vampire Bat Pet, and all of these items disappeared along with the end of the event, meaning they can only be obtained today in exchange for truly exorbitant amounts of gold. In the first place on this list, we have, of course, the most ambitious event in the entire history of World of Warcraft, and also one of the largest war efforts ever seen in the history of online video games. A task so monumental that it required the cooperation of absolutely all the players on your server, forcing the Horde and the Alliance to temporarily set aside their differences to face a new common challenge and unlock the new raid in Ahn'Qiraj, which would remain sealed until players managed to complete this incredibly demanding challenge. The story revolved around the rise of the Qiraji Empire. Thousands of years ago, the insectoid Qiraji, led by the old god Cthulhu, attempted to conquer the lands of Kalimdor, where they were stopped by the Dragonflights and the Night Elves, who sealed the Qiraji behind the massive Scarab Wall in the desert of Xal'atath. In the year 2006, the Qiraji began to rise once again and prepare for a second invasion. So to stop them, the inhabitants of Azeroth had to unite their forces and take the war directly into their territory. But in order to do this, someone first had to rebuild the Scepter of the Shifting Sands and strike the famous Scarab Gong with it to open the sealed gates of the temple. And for this task, resources were needed. A lot of resources, since the event was divided into two main parts. First, we had the war effort, which was a massive resource-gathering operation where the entire faction had to deliver millions of basic supplies to military NPCs spread across the main capitals. Astronomical quantities of items were requested, specifically designed to empty the economies of the servers and force everyone who had been hoarding materials to finally release them. A task in which characters of all levels had to participate, and items were even transferred from one faction to the other through the auction house just to meet the requirements. That's only the first part, because while the massive groups of players were collecting resources, the guilds and top-level players embarked on journeys complete with the longest and most difficult questions ever created, the Scepter of the Shifting Sands, where only one player per guild is supposed to attempt it to Western all give full support. And top-level players embarked on a journey to complete one of the longest and most difficult quest chains ever created. The Scepter of the Shifting Sands, where only one player per guild was supposed to attempt it while everyone else gave their full support. The mission involved gaining reputation with the Brood of Nozdormu by killing thousands of elite insectoids in Xal'atath, retrieving the head of a broodlord inside Blackwing Lair, and collecting the 3 fragments of the scepter through extremely difficult tasks for that time, such as facing the Shade of Irenicus in Teldrassil, fighting a giant shark in Azshara, and defeating empowered versions of the world bosses. But once the war effort was finally completed, and after 5 full days had passed to transport all the supplies to Xal'atath, the player who had the scepter could finally strike the gong and open the raid gates. That single strike triggered the legendary 10-hour war, where the gates opened and massive waves of Anubisaths and giant Qiraji flooded the lands of Xal'atath, destroying everything in their path. At the same time, giant resonating crystals appeared in different areas all over the world, creating local invasions so that low-level players could also participate in the global defense. And once these were defeated, players were finally able to enter the raid of Ahn'Qiraj and obtain all the new and powerful equipment waiting inside. And of course, those incredibly lucky players who were able to strike the gong still hold the title of Scarab Lord and ride the legendary mount, the Black Qiraji Resonating Crystal. Two of the rarest rewards in the entire game that only true legends possess. While leveling up, many players choose to walk the dark paths of Duskwood, where a small detail catches our attention in the cold cemetery of Raven Hill, an eroded grave, its inscription barely readable, bearing the name Morgan Lattimore, and whose disturbed soil suggests that someone, or something, has risen from it. Intrigued, the player returns to Darkshire to ask about this strange name, where, by consulting an old book, we learn several details about the long and tragic story of Morgan Lattimore. In life, he was a good and noble man who was forced to leave his family behind to march off to war, where he fought alongside Uther against the forces of the Scourge that threatened the world of Azeroth. During those years, Morgan witnessed true horrors: the dissolution of the Knights of the Silver Hand, the death of Uther, and the unstoppable advance of the Scourge. Even so, he continued fighting with the hope of one day reuniting with his wife and his 3 children. But when he finally returned from the war, he found his home completely devastated, and the forest he once remembered as green and full of life was now corrupted and crawling with undead. He desperately searched for his family, but absolutely no one knew what had happened to them. A priest even suggested that he search the graves at Raven Hill, claiming that there he would find his family. A suggestion that Morgan, blinded by grief, outright refused. However, after finding no answers anywhere else, he eventually decided to go to the last place left to him. There, in that eerie cemetery, he recognized not only the names of friends and neighbors, but finally found the grave of his beloved wife and 2 of his children. Morgan, consumed by the death of his family and overwhelmed by uncontrollable pain, drew his sword and unleashed his fury upon the other gravestones in the cemetery. When the guards attempted to stop him, he took their lives without hesitation. But upon regaining his senses and realizing what he had done, he plunged a dagger into his own heart. His body, along with those of his victims, was hastily buried in a corner of the cemetery. However, the guilt of having killed innocents and the pain of losing his family prevented him from resting in peace. Days later, the grave was desecrated. The corpse had vanished, and a new being known as Mor'Ladim began to roam Duskwood, a spirit consumed by sorrow and hatred, trapped within a cold, lifeless body. With this story in mind, the player seeks out Commander Althea Ebenlock in Darkshire. She confirms that an undead creature called Mor'Ladim is wandering the forest, attacking patrols, and that it is likely the restless body of Morgan Lattimore. She asks us to confront him, warning that even the strongest Night Watch members have died trying to stop him. An elite mob that posed a major challenge for most players, who in many cases needed the help of others just to stand a chance at defeating him. After a brutal fight, we managed to kill Mor'Ladim and bring his skull back to Althea, who thanks us, but also reveals one final detail. Morgan's daughter, Sarah, survived and now serves as a Night Watch guard. When speaking with Sarah, she laments not having been able to help her father and gives us his ring, asking that we place it on the grave. When we do, a spectral voice whispers that he finally knows his daughter lives and that he can now rest in peace. As a sign of gratitude, he offers us his sword, Arceus, entrusting us with the task of continuing his mission to fight for good. A two-handed sword that is quite beautiful and solid for its level, and one that carries a tremendous emotional weight. And thus concludes one of the most tragic and moving quest chains in World of Warcraft, helping Morgan's tormented soul find peace and tying up the loose ends of a family destroyed by war. We now travel to the Hillsbrad foothills, where we find a Horde-exclusive quest that, unlike the previous one, takes on a much more humorous tone. A quest given by High Executor Darthalia in Terran Mill, an undead who promises to turn us into a true Forsaken officer and explains that our new mission consists of handing out quests to newcomers, effectively transforming us into a real quest-giving NPC within the game. We mount her skeletal horse and position ourselves to deliver quests to would-be adventurers looking for work, each of whom represents a different player archetype. First up is Dumat, a low-level undead who shouts everything in all caps, claps nonstop, and greets everyone like a maniac. He tells us that a being of light resurrected him and that he now serves the Banshee Queen. We suggest that he go rest, but he insists on getting a quest, so we pretend that a new task has just come in and send him on a mission to the Azure Lode mine, pointing the way with our finger. However, he immediately runs off in the opposite direction, proving that we are dealing with a true noob. As soon as he leaves, the next one appears. King Slayer Orcus, a level 80 orc riding a frost dragon, who mocks us for being a simple quest giver while boasting about having defeated the Lich King himself. An orc who clearly represents the classic endgame player who has already done absolutely everything in the game, and now spends his time completing leftover low-level quests and killing any opposing faction newbie that crosses his path. So we send him off to kill Worgen in the area. Lastly, we meet Johnny Awesome, who is clearly the stereotypical arrogant player, massively overgeared for his level and riding a paid mount from the Blizzard store. When we complete and turn in the quest, Darthalia tells us that these are the kinds of players she has to deal with on a daily basis, and we learn that being an NPC is not as easy as it seems. However, the story doesn't end there, because while Dumas and Johnny Awesome disappear without a trace, the player encounters Orcus again later, finding him on the verge of drowning after falling into the water, even though we quickly remind him that the water barely reaches his ankles. Embarrassed, Orcus regains his composure, returns to shore, and together we tend to the wounds of his loyal mount, Kasha. Once recovered, Orcus, Kashi, and the player fly to Purgation Isle, fighting their way through Alliance forces until reaching the heart of the enemy camp, where Vandar, Belinda, and Ivar await, 3 powerful figures of the Alliance. Upon discovering crucial battle plans, Orcus comes up with an idea: to kill the Stormpike Battlemaster and hold off the remaining 3 leaders on his own, giving us enough time to escape with the documents aboard Kasha. And although up until that point Orcus had proven himself to be nothing more than a loudmouth, in that moment he charges without hesitation into the 3 enemies, an incredible act of bravery that gives us the seconds we need to flee with the plans. Orcus is defeated, but Kasha manages to return for him and takes flight back toward Tarren Mill. During the journey, gravely wounded, Orcus dies, asking us with his final breath to find a cold and safe place where his beloved mount can live in peace. Upon delivering the plans to High Warlord Kromush, Orcus is officially honored as a hero of the Horde, and his sacrifice ultimately plays a key role in the eventual destruction of the Stormpike clan in Hillsbrad. As a final detail, after his death, Orcus can be seen patrolling Tarren Mill as a spirit, mounted atop his loyal Frostworm, reminding us that the orc who began as a parody ultimately left his mark on the history of Azeroth. To conclude our journey through some of the most memorable quests in World of Warcraft, we travel to the wild and dangerous jungles of Un'Goro Crater, where we find what is, for me, one of the most epic quests in all of WoW Classic. Hidden among the game's vegetation and with no marker on the map, curious players could stumble upon a small, simple, wrecked raft. Interacting with it would begin the quest "It's a Secret to Everybody," a direct reference to one of the most famous messages from The Legend of Zelda. Inside the raft, we find a small package containing a rolled-up map, a compass, a lion-headed key, and an old photograph. Personal belongings that clearly belonged to an adventurer, yet no one seemed to be searching for them. Following the map's clues, we arrive at Marshall's refuge, where we meet a gnome dressed entirely in green named Lincoln. Upon returning his belongings, he confesses that he remembers absolutely nothing about his past or how he ended up there, making it clear that he is suffering from severe memory loss. However, upon examining his sword, something stirs within him. He remembers that it must be reforged, although he cannot recall why or how. He then hands us his training sword, asking for our help to restore the power it once held, and sends us to Winterspring to begin the tempering process. From that moment on, we embark on a long and demanding quest chain in search of various components needed to strengthen the weapon, taking us through Winterspring, Feralas, and eventually Tanaris. There, the quest takes a rather unexpected turn, as we must drink a strange elixir that temporarily kills us, allowing part of the quest to be completed in ghost form. As if that weren't enough, we are also required to face Aquamentus, powerful level 54 water elemental whose essence is crucial to continue the ritual of reforging the sword. Once all these steps are completed, the final stretch brings us back to the heart of Ahn'Qiraj Crater, where we must face Blaze Runner, a level 56 elite fire elemental that represents the last trial before completing Lincoln's adventure. After a tough fight, all that remains is to return to Marshall's Refuge to turn in the quest. As a reward, we can choose between two truly unique items. On one hand, Lincoln's Sword of Mastery, with its very distinctive design and an effect that deals nature damage on hit. And on the other, the Spirit of Aquamentus, an offhand item for casters that, in my opinion, is not worth choosing unless you are a hardcore min-maxer obsessed with numbers. Because after completing such a long and memorable quest chain, the least I expect is to walk away with Lincoln's sword, even if only as a collectible. And that is exactly what I chose when I completed it on my Warlock in Classic. Additionally, the quest also rewards us with Lincoln's Boomerang, a trinket that allows us to throw a boomerang at our enemies to deal damage. Without a doubt, very curious items and an iconic sword that became forever tied to one of the most special and beloved quest lines in the entire history of World of Warcraft, which was sadly removed with the arrival of Cataclysm, but thankfully can still be experienced on the game's classic servers.
The wind whispers loudly between the walls of Xal'atath, the majestic Draenei city of Draenor. In the sky of Talador shines the enormous violet dome that characterizes it, a magical shield under which one of the most brutal wars in history was fought. At least, of course, in a parallel reality to ours, because during the initial development of Warlords of Draenor, Blizzard planned for Xal'atath to be the setting for a massive raid. Let's imagine for a moment the heroes of Azeroth storming its imposing streets, fighting the soldiers of the fierce Iron Horde and the Void forces that had collaborated to drive the Draenei from their home. A war conflict that would have been extremely epic to see in the world of WoW. But despite how great it sounded, the plan never came to fruition, but was instead discarded without much explanation, along with so many other things that were in development, and that players were eagerly awaiting for Warlords of Draenor, an expansion that could have been much more than it was. By the time of the launch, the structures of Xal'atath had been reduced to a mere backdrop for side quests. There were no epic bosses, memorable battles, or powerful items dropping from the bosses of this raid, because that raid simply never came to exist. Nowadays, we can walk through the ruins of Xal'atath and see that great sealed gate, an entrance that was never opened for players. But well, if it had so much potential, then why did they decide to remove it? Well, the reality is that the developers never gave us a concrete answer. But the clues suggest that what killed this raid was rush development. Multiple last-minute plot twists and internal pressure from Blizzard to deliver the content faster to avoid long gaps between patches. That's how the case of Xal'atath has been forgotten, and only left us with a bittersweet taste. Everything was absolutely ready to become one of the most memorable raids in World of Warcraft, but sadly that will forever remain in a parallel reality which we will never get to know. Let's now descend into the darkness beneath the ice. In the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, the icy continent of Northrend concealed an ancient empire hidden forever from the player's eyes. It is about Azjol-Nerub, the kingdom of the Nerubian race, highly intelligent arachnid beings who once dared to challenge the Lich King and the power of the Scourge. The players who explored Northrend surely remember them well, but even more so, they will remember the two dungeons where we faced these creatures, both the ancient kingdom of Ahn'Qiraj and also Azjol-Nerub. However, originally, Blizzard had planned something much bigger with this theme.
The thing is, Azjol-Nerub was going to be the first underground area in the entire history of World of Warcraft. An open map to explore and do quests located right below the tundra and Dragonblight. During the development of Wrath of the Lich King, the designers envisioned a vast underground labyrinth for players, an empire of Azjol-Nerub that would extend across half of the Northrend map, interconnecting various regions and with several access points from the surface. A real kingdom underground with Nerubian cities inspired by the typical architecture of Naxxramas. Or at least that was how the developer Corey Stockton had described it. They even considered introducing special mounts with spider-like shapes capable of climbing walls to explore the depths of these cities and their multiple caverns, given, of course, the verticality of this area. But, well, unfortunately, the developers' vision exceeded the technical and time limits they had for the project, as creating a completely new underground area presented enormous challenges for the game engine and its features of those times, which could have caused major performance and gameplay issues. That's why Blizzard ended up canceling this supposed Arachnid realm during the Wrath of the Lich King beta, and instead split the content into just 2 dungeons for 5 players. These were, as we mentioned before, Azjol-Nerub and Ahn'Qiraj, which are undeniably impressive and were very striking for the time. However, in the background, we can see various Nerubian constructions in the distance, and enormous decorations that give us a small hint of what this could have been like if it really became a reality. A full-fledged underground kingdom. That is why to this day, when we play either of these 2 dungeons, we feel like we are just scratching the surface of what the developers wanted to create at the time. A removed content that certainly saddened players, but that, well, over time served as inspiration for new content, such as the Azjol-Nerub zone of the expansion The War Within, which is clearly inspired by this idea, and at least helps us imagine a bit how this area might have been during Wrath of the Lich King. Something that would have been really innovative for those times. In the early years of World of Warcraft, when we were still discovering the limits of player versus player combat, a wild idea emerged. Just imagine for a second a hidden place under the legendary Gurubashi Arena in Stranglethorn Vale. A cold maze full of dark corridors, cages, traps, and orc warriors ready to charge against us. A secret arena where players would face each other clandestinely in a 5-on-5 deathmatch with no other goal than to survive as the last one standing. Exactly, that was the Gurubashi Catacombs, a very striking concept created by Blizzard that was cancelled before it was born. This was a 5 versus 5 deathmatch style battlefield, where each player had only 1 life and their only mission was to find and eliminate the opposing team's players before they did so first. A place full of tunnels and labyrinths that players had to navigate to meet and fight face to face. A scenario that Blizzard developed between patches 1.5 and 1.7 of WoW Vanilla. But that, well, never ended up being implemented, since during the beta of this BG, the catacombs were cancelled because the developers thought they were too big, and that the players would have trouble finding each other. Also, balancing between classes was a huge problem, with the casters dying very quickly during the many tests they conducted. That is why, and for many other reasons, this idea ended up being abandoned, and sometime later during a BlizzCon, The Blizzard team said they learned several things from this cancelled concept. Among them, that objectives were the core of the gameplay in BGs, that the arena map should be smaller, and that WoW was not a first-person shooter, so this game mode was not suitable to copy from other video games, and put directly into WoW because it simply wasn't going to work. Oh, and yes, they also said it wasn't fun at all to be a healer in an elimination mode, where most encounters were one-on-one. This is how this idea ended up being discarded and only remained in the imagination of the players, where some of them decided to take it to the next level and even recreated this concept on different private servers. Let's start with something big. In the files of World of Warcraft, there are several areas that were planned or even almost completely developed, but which we never got to see in the final version of the original game, such as the famous Karajan Catacombs or Old Ironforge. But don't worry, it doesn't stop there, because there were also 2 entire islands that were literally on the official map of Azeroth, but we could never see them in the game. Around Stranglethorn Vale, we could find Gilligam's Isle and Dr. Lepidus's Isle. In the alpha version of WoW, these 2 islands existed as real zones with terrain, troll ruins, and other intriguing objects. They also appeared in the game's maps, the original manual, and even in promotional material from that time. However, none of these were accessible by the players in the final version of the game, so it was never known what they were intended for, let alone who this supposed Dr. Lepidus was. Long before reaching the modern version of World of Warcraft, the Emerald Dream was intended to be a vanilla zone. In fact, the developers started a complete map of this area that they never managed to finish. In early alpha files, we can find a huge green terrain, full of hills and plants with a psychedelic design. A truly massive area that was internally categorized as a raid for 40 players. But sadly, we never got to see it in the official game. It is true that some of the content could be recycled in later expansions, but the idea of seeing a map of that large size as a final network in the original vanilla version would have been something truly spectacular for the time. But, well, it wasn't all about PvE content, because if we talk about player versus player areas, there are some that were largely developed but never released to the public. One of them was Kaladar, a battlefield with 3 MOBA-style routes, human fortresses on one side, orcs on the other, mines in the middle with an entrance on each path, watchtowers, and even a goblin lab. A battleground that could have been very interesting, but Blizzard decided to abandon it before the official game release, and so it never became playable content. The Snowy Plains is a map that was mentioned both in Warcraft 3 and Warcraft 2, but it was during the alpha of vanilla back in the year 2003, where this huge and snowy map appeared in the game files. The place had one side for the Horde and another for the Alliance, and, well, also a couple of binding stones that were previously used to mark the location of resurrection spirits. So it's most likely that this vast frozen territory was going to be a battleground, maybe similar to what we know today as Alterac Valley, but of course, much smaller. Something similar happened with the Ashur Crater, a huge valley where players from different factions could face each other. An area that was once modeled inside the game client, with a massive crater surrounded by mountain ranges and even caves in the northern area of Azshara that served as access points for the players. All of this existed. It was modeled and created in the game, but it never left the private files of the game. The battlefield was cancelled, but its entries remain to this day in Azshara as portals that lead absolutely nowhere. Blizzard had big initial plans for the PvP in this vanilla version of the game, as they had also considered something called Gurubashi Catacombs, an underground place that was going to be located just below the famous Gurubashi Arena in Stranglethorn Vale, where instead of battles 10 against 10 or 15 against 15, we were going to see something radically different. A deathmatch-style map, 5 versus 5, with no flags, no bases, or anything like that, just pure and hard combat until only one is left standing. A very interesting idea, but Blizzard canceled it after rigorous tests for being, according to them, too large and therefore players took too long to find each other, lacked clear objectives beyond kill or be killed, had major balancing issues where, of course, casters were at a huge disadvantage compared to physical classes as it was an enclosed environment. Well, according to the developers themselves, the arena maps, they have to be small since WoW is not a shooter, and the objectives matter much more than just killing your opponent. Even today, many people don't know, but in the alpha version of WoW, there was a kind of secondary profession called survival skills, which provided the player with the necessary tools to face the dangers of Azeroth's night, whether it be lighting campfires or creating torches to illuminate dark areas such as Duskwood. Since the game's graphics engine at that time made the night really dark, and torches were used to provide visibility in these types of areas. This is why many NPCs in Duskwood still carry torches in their hands today. Something that undoubtedly would have added an extra layer of immersion and danger to the game world. Later, other somewhat less important professions were also considered, such as tracking, a secondary profession that was never implemented and we don't know what it is for. But it is speculated that it was going to be a kind of creature tracking system, similar to what hunters do from their minimap. Also, there was map making to create maps, and a brewery that allowed brewing beers which granted buffs and other temporary effects on the player. Something that, of course, later ended up being included within the cooking profession. Another interesting fact is that the secondary profession of first aid was not only going to be able to heal minor injuries, but it was even thought that it could create aromatic salts capable of fully reviving fallen players, something that, well, would have been quite overpowered. Some complete game mechanics were also removed or completely redesigned before their release, and, well, some others are so curious that today we find it hard to believe they were ever part of the original design. For example, Tauren were not going to have a mount, but instead their racial ability called plains running was a kind of gradual sprint that activated after running in a straight line for a few seconds. The longer you ran, the faster you would go, until reaching, of course, the speed of a mount. On paper this sounded very good, but in practice it was a big headache. It would cut out when taking damage, was hard to control, and caused great imbalances in PvP, so, well, Blizzard removed it shortly before the official launch, and the Tauren ended up receiving the classic Kodos as their racial mount, which, by the way, is one of the most attractive in the game. The warrior also had a very different mechanic, and in the alpha version his charge ability was not a visual sprint like the one we know today, but rather an instant teleport to the enemy. Literally like a mage's blink, since you disappeared from your place and appeared in front of your enemy. This was very unintuitive. It broke the immersion of the class and was replaced by the traditional charge before the public beta of World of Warcraft. And speaking of rare abilities, at the beginning both rogues and druids had access to Feign Death. You know, playing dead. The typical ability that was later restricted exclusively to hunters. There were also other ideas that were not fully implemented, such as the fatigue system. And, well, it's rumored that during WoW's pre-alpha, a mechanic was tested where if you played for too long, your character would gain much less experience. To put it simply, it was something like the rest system, but in reverse. There is equally no solid evidence that this was included in the game client, but several developers mentioned it in interviews as one of the many experiments that ended up being discarded for fear of frustrating players. And yes, this mechanic seems to me something completely absurd. And also, of course, one of the most cherished and postponed ideas in this great game was player housing. In the alpha version of the game, there was even a hidden blue portal in Stormwind that led to an area reserved for player housing, as Blizzard wanted to create residential neighborhoods where players could decorate their homes and live there with friends. But the system was so ambitious for the time that it ended up being scrapped just before launch. Luckily, after more than 20 years, we are finally going to have this system in the game, which will be arriving soon with the Midnight expansion. But, well, not everything is just simple ideas or unfinished code of things that we never got to see in the game. But there are also other things that exist in the official version of vanilla but were never completely finished, from zones, stories, and other content that is present in the game client, but which was left unfinished or simply not used. One of these things was unique chains of class-specific quests that granted special rewards or abilities, such as the Paladin and Warlock mounts, or the typical quests that unlocked each Shaman totem. Many of them made it to the final game, but many others were forgotten or greatly simplified. When the Cataclysm expansion was announced, the developers said they were going to completely change the world of Azeroth, but there were still many hidden things that players had not yet discovered in the old world. And well, several of them came from as far back as vanilla itself. That is how the players went to explore every corner of the map, in search of all these undiscovered secrets, and found a place that absolutely no one had discovered in all these years. On top of one of the many rocks of the Thousand Needles, players found an inaccessible area that they could only reach by making a jump with slow fall from another one of the taller rocks. There they found a large rock, and next to it many other smaller ones aligned in a specific way to form a drawing in the game. A place that meant absolutely nothing to most players, unless of course you are a shaman who, for some strange reason, had kept in his inventory the item Earth Sapta, given to you during the class mission to get the Earth Totem, which when used granted us a special buff called Sapta's Gaze, that allowed you to detect elemental spirits hidden in plain sight. And that was where, at the top of this inaccessible area that no one knew about, next to a rock, reminiscent, of course, of previous shaman class missions, appeared several air spirits called lesser air manifestations. So apparently this place was meant to be part of the chain of quests for the air totem, for shamans that the developers never finished, forgot to remove from the game, and sadly simplified in the original version of the game.
And so, friends, that's how today's video ends. Thank you all so much for being there on the other side, and see you soon in the next video. Bye-bye.